They found him at dawn, the richest man in Wheeler County, kneeling in the dust beside a grave that wasn't even dug yet, clutching a worn handkerchief that smelled like lavender and homemade bread. Samuel Hale owned 40,000 acres, but in that moment he looked like he owned nothing at all. This is the story of how a man who had everything discovered he'd been starving his entire life, and how a woman with nothing taught him what it meant to be wealthy. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The heat in Wheeler County didn't just beat down, it pressed into your lungs, wrapped around your throat, made you wonder if breathing was even worth the effort. Summer of 1873 came in like a punishment, the kind that made grown men question their life choices and cattle drop dead in fields that used to be green. Samuel Hale stood on the wraparound porch of his mansion, and it was a mansion, no point being humble about it, watching the sun climb over land that belonged to him as far as the eye could see. 40,000 acres, 3,000 head of cattle, a house with 14 rooms, though he only used 3. At 32 years old, he was the kind of success story people told their sons about, the kind they pointed to as proof that hard work and smart decisions could build an empire. None of them knew he woke up every morning wishing he could hear another voice in this godforsaken house. "Mr. Hale!" Samuel turned. His foreman, Dutch Keller, stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand. Dutch was 60 if he was a day, face like worn leather, loyalty like iron. He'd been with Samuel since the beginning, back when this ranch was just an idea and a prayer. "What is it?" "We got a situation with the north fence line. Looks like rustlers took another dozen head last night." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Third time this month." "You get a look at them?" "Tracks heading east. Same pattern as before." Dutch shifted his weight. "We could set up a night watch, catch them in the act." "Do it." "And Dutch?" "This time I don't want them caught. I want them scared enough they never come back." "Understood." Dutch started to turn, then stopped. "Oh, and there's a woman here, showed up about an hour ago looking for work." Samuel frowned. "What kind of work?" "Maid, cook, whatever you need. Says she's got experience in big houses back east." Dutch's expression was carefully neutral. "She's waiting in the kitchen. Been there quiet as a mouse." "I'll talk to her." Samuel moved toward the door, then paused. "What's she look like?" "Why don't you see for yourself?" The question irritated him more than it should have. Samuel didn't like games, didn't like mystery. He liked things straight and clear. But Dutch was already walking toward the stables, and Samuel was left standing there feeling like he'd been maneuvered into something he didn't quite understand. The house swallowed him as he stepped inside. That was the thing about big empty spaces. They didn't just contain silence, they amplified it. His boots echoed on hardwood floors that hadn't seen a proper cleaning in months. The cook he'd hired lasted 3 weeks before complaining about the isolation. The housekeeper before that made it 2. Nobody wanted to work for a man who barely spoke, in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The kitchen was at the back of the house, the only room that still held any warmth. His previous cook, Mrs. Henderson, had made it her domain before deciding she'd rather work for a family in town. "Somewhere with a bit of life to it, Mr. Hale, if you don't mind my saying." He'd minded, but he'd let her go anyway. The woman standing by the stove had her back to him. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed. Small and thin in a way that spoke of too many missed meals. Her dress was clean but worn, patched in places with mismatched fabric. Dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. "You're looking for work." She spun around fast, and something in that movement made Samuel's instincts sharpen. That wasn't surprise. That was fear. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, careful. She kept her eyes down. "I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden. I don't eat much, and I don't need much pay. Just a place to stay and enough to save a little." Samuel studied her. She couldn't be more than 25, maybe younger. Pretty in a fragile sort of way, like something that might break if you held it too tight. But it was her hands he noticed most. Red, rough, the hands of someone who'd worked hard their whole life. "What's your name?" "Lillian Voss, sir." "Where are you from, Miss Voss?" A pause. "Too long." "Back east. Pennsylvania originally." "That's a long way to travel for maid work." "Yes, sir." "You running from something?" Her head jerked up for just a moment, eyes meeting his. They were gray, he noticed. Gray like storm clouds. Then she looked down again, and he saw her hands tremble before she clasped them together. "No, sir. Just looking for a fresh start." Liar. But everyone had secrets, and Samuel Hale was in no position to judge. He had enough of his own. "You know how to handle a big house?" "Yes, sir. I worked in the Harrington estate for 3 years, 30 rooms. I know how to manage." "This house has 14 rooms. I use 3. The rest haven't been touched in months." He paused. "Why'd you leave the Harrington place?" Another hesitation. "The family moved abroad. Didn't need the full staff." Another lie, or at least not the whole truth. But she was here. She needed work, and God knew he needed someone who could make this place feel less like a tomb. "Pay is $15 a month, room and board included. You'll have the small bedroom off the kitchen. I expect breakfast at 6, dinner at 7. The rest of the time you can spend however you see fit keeping this place running. I don't entertain, I don't host parties, I don't want conversation. Do your work, stay out of my way, and we'll get along fine." "Yes, sir. One more thing." Samuel's voice hardened. "I don't tolerate theft, I don't tolerate lies, and I don't tolerate drama. You bring any trouble to my door, you're gone the same day. Understood?" She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Start today. Dutch will show you to your room." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Miss Voss?" "Sir?" "Why here? Why this ranch, this job?" For the first time she looked directly at him, really looked, and what he saw in those gray eyes made something in his chest tighten, a kind of desperate exhaustion that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "Because nobody knows me here," she said quietly, "and I'd like to keep it that way." Samuel nodded slowly. "Fair enough." The first week passed in a strange new rhythm. Samuel would wake at dawn to find breakfast already waiting, nothing fancy but solid and hot, and better than anything he'd managed for himself. Eggs, bacon, biscuits that actually tasted like biscuits instead of hardtack. He'd eat alone in the dining room, hearing the distant sounds of Lillian moving through the house like a ghost. She kept her word about staying out of his way. He'd come home in the evening to find rooms that had been dark for months suddenly clean and aired out, dust covers removed from furniture, windows washed. The whole house seemed to exhale as if it had been holding its breath and finally remembered how to breathe. But she was never where he could see her working. She anticipated his movements, disappeared into other parts of the house whenever he entered a room. At dinner, she'd set his plate and vanish before he could say thank you. It was like living with a particularly efficient ghost. Dutch noticed, of course. Dutch noticed everything. "She's settling in all right?" the foreman asked one afternoon while they inspected the new fence line. "I suppose. Does her work. Keeps quiet. Keeps invisible, you mean?" Dutch shot him a sideways look. "When's the last time you actually saw her?" Samuel had to think about it. "Yesterday morning. Briefly." "Uh-huh. You know what I think? I'm sure you'll tell me regardless. I think that girl's running from something bad. Real bad. The way she jumps at loud noises, the way she checks every window before she settles into a room. I seen soldiers act like that after the war. She's scared." Samuel felt something cold settle in his gut. "You think someone's after her?" "I think someone was." Dutch hammered in another fence post. "Whether they still are, that's the question." "She hasn't brought any trouble here. Yet." "You saying I should let her go?" Dutch was quiet for a long moment. "No, I'm saying keep your eyes open, and maybe—" He paused. "Maybe try being less of a bear about things. Girl that's scared doesn't need another thing to be afraid of." The word stung more than Samuel wanted to admit. "I'm not—" "You're a hard man, Samuel. Nothing wrong with that in business. But in a house?" Dutch shook his head. "House needs something softer, or it stops being a home and just becomes a building." That night, Samuel came home earlier than usual. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He walked in through the back door toward the kitchen and stopped. Lillian was singing, not loud, barely more than a hum, really, but it was the first human sound he'd heard in this house in months that wasn't his own voice or the creaking of old wood. She stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled like heaven, completely unaware of his presence. Samuel meant to announce himself, meant to clear his throat or say her name, but something kept him frozen there, just listening. The song was old, something he vaguely recognized from childhood. His mother used to sing it while she worked. The memory hit him like a fist to the chest. His mother in their small farmhouse kitchen, flour on her hands, singing while she kneaded bread. She'd been dead 20 years. Lillian turned suddenly, saw him, and the song died. The fear that flashed across her face made Samuel's stomach turn. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't hear you come in. Dinner isn't quite ready yet." "It's fine." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "What were you singing?" "Nothing. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize." He moved into the kitchen, suddenly tired of this constant dance of fear and distance. "My mother used to sing that song. I haven't heard it in years." Lillian relaxed just slightly. "It's an old one. My grandmother taught it to me. It's nice. The house is quieter without it." They stood there in awkward silence. Samuel realized this was the longest conversation they'd had since she arrived. He should say something, should try to be, as Dutch put it, less of a bear. "The house looks good," he finally managed. "Better than it has in a long time." "Thank you, sir." "You don't have to call me sir. Mr. Hale is fine." "Yes, sir." She caught herself. "Mr. Hale." Another silence. This was painful. Samuel had negotiated cattle deals worth thousands of dollars, had stared down rustlers in drought, and every hardship the Texas plains could throw at him. But standing in his own kitchen, trying to make simple conversation with his own employee, felt like trying to climb a mountain in the dark. "I'll be in my study," he said finally. "Call me when dinner's ready." "Yes, sir." He winced. Close enough. The pattern continued for another week. Small glimpses of Lillian, her moving through the garden she'd started in the back, hanging laundry on lines that hadn't been used in years, sitting on the back porch with a basket of mending as the sun set. She was everywhere and nowhere, present but absent, fixing his life while remaining invisible in it. It was driving him slowly mad. The ranch kept him busy during the days. They'd caught the rustlers. Dutch and his men had done exactly what Samuel asked, scared them enough that word spread through the county about what happened when you stole from Samuel Hale. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't gentle, but it was effective. But the nights were different. The nights were when Samuel became aware of just how empty his life had become. He'd sit in his study, supposedly going over account books, but really just listening to the sounds of Lillian moving through the house. The soft pad of her feet on the stairs, the distant clink of dishes, the occasional snatch of song when she thought she was alone. 3 weeks after she arrived, everything changed. Samuel had ridden out to check on the southern herd, a long day under a brutal sun. He came home exhausted, every muscle aching, his shirt soaked through with sweat. It was past midnight, later than he'd meant to be. The house was dark. Lillian would be asleep in her room off the kitchen. Samuel trudged upstairs, barely managing to shed his boots before collapsing onto the bed fully clothed. He meant to sleep. He tried to sleep. But exhaustion was a strange thing. Sometimes you were so tired that sleep became impossible. Your body too wound up to let go. So he lay there in the dark, eyes closed, listening to the house settle around him. And then he heard it. Footsteps. Soft, careful. Coming down the hallway toward his room. Samuel's eyes snapped open. His hand moved instinctively toward the drawer where he kept his gun. The door creaked open slowly, and a figure slipped inside. Even in the darkness, he recognized her silhouette. Lillian. Every muscle in Samuel's body tensed. What was she doing? Robbery? But Dutch had been right. She didn't seem like a thief. Something else, then. Something worse. He forced himself to remain still, to breathe steadily, to give every appearance of deep sleep. Through barely cracked eyelids, he watched her approach the bed. She moved so carefully, like someone crossing a frozen lake who wasn't sure if the ice would hold. When she reached his bedside, she stopped. Then slowly, she knelt down. Samuel's mind raced. This made no sense. If she was going to rob him, she'd be moving faster, searching for valuables. If she meant him harm... She reached out, and Samuel braced himself. Her hands went to his boots. He'd been too tired to remove them properly, had kicked them half off and left them dangling from his feet. Now Lillian carefully, gently, pulled them free. She set them aside with such care they barely made a sound. Then she lifted the blanket from the foot of the bed, the one he'd been too exhausted to pull over himself, and drew it up over his body. She tucked it in around his shoulders with a tenderness that made something in Samuel's chest crack open, and then she bowed her head. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent room Samuel heard every word. "Please," she breathed. "Please let him find peace. He's so alone. I can see it in everything. The empty rooms, the silence, the way he moves through this house like he's forgotten what it means to belong somewhere. Please bring someone into his life who can see him. Not his money, not his power. Just him. He deserves to be loved for who he is." Samuel stopped breathing. "And please keep him safe," she continued, "from whatever darkness waits outside these walls, from loneliness, from the hardness that I can see taking root in his heart. He's a good man. I know he is. I can see it in the small kindnesses he doesn't think I notice, the way he leaves extra money on the kitchen table when supplies run low, the way he tells Dutch to give the men bonuses, the way he fixed the broken step on the back porch so I wouldn't trip. He thinks no one sees, but I do. Please let him know that he's seen." She stayed there for another moment, her head bowed, her hands clasped. Then she rose just as quietly as she'd come and slipped out of the room like smoke. Samuel lay frozen in the dark, his heart hammering against his ribs. For the first time in longer than he could remember, tears burned behind his eyes. Tig. He didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice. Please let him find peace. He deserves to be loved for who he is. When had anyone last wanted something for him that wasn't tied to profit or advantage? When had anyone seen past the ranch, the money, the success he'd built like a fortress around himself? When had anyone seen him at all? Dawn came slowly. Samuel rose from bed and stood at his window, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere below, he heard Lillian moving through the kitchen, starting breakfast like she did every morning. Like last night had never happened. But it had happened. And Samuel Hale, who prided himself on his practical nature, his ability to see situations clearly and make hard decisions without sentiment, Samuel Hale had no idea what to do with what he'd witnessed. She wasn't stealing from him. She was praying for him. She wasn't using him. She was taking care of him. And she had no idea he knew. The question was, what was he going to do about it? He went downstairs in a daze. Breakfast was waiting in the dining room as always, eggs, bacon, fresh bread that filled the house with warmth. But this morning, Lillian was still in the kitchen. Samuel made a decision. He picked up his plate and walked into the kitchen. Lillian looked up, startled. "Mr. Hale? Is something wrong with the food?" "No." He set the plate down at the small kitchen table, the one he'd never used because it seemed beneath him to eat where the servants worked. "The food's fine. I just thought I'd eat in here this morning." She stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "That is," he continued, suddenly uncertain, "unless you'd prefer I didn't." "No, sir. Yes, sir. She took a breath. "It's your house. You can eat wherever you like." "Thank you." He sat down, suddenly aware of how large he must seem in this small space. Would you join me?" Now she really did look scared. "Sir? I thought we could talk, if you're not too busy." "I don't understand." Samuel didn't understand either. He was making this up as he went, operating on pure instinct for the first time in his adult life. "I've been thinking, you've been here almost a month now. I barely know anything about you. That doesn't seem right. I'm just the maid, Mr. Hale. You're a person who lives in my house. That makes you more than just anything." Lillian stood frozen by the counter, clearly torn between obedience and self-preservation. Finally, slowly, she sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her shoulders tense. "Where in Pennsylvania are you from?" Samuel asked. "A small town. You wouldn't know it. Try me. Willow Creek, near Pittsburgh." "And your family?" Something shuddered in her expression. "Gone." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." But her voice said it wasn't long enough. They sat in uncomfortable silence. Samuel had never been good at this. Small talk, drawing people out, the social graces that seemed to come so easily to others. But he thought about her prayer last night, about her kneeling beside his bed asking for his happiness, and he pushed forward. "I lost my parents young too," he said. "My father died when I was 15, farm accident. My mother followed 6 months later. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think it was just a broken heart. Lillian's expression softened. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was. I was alone after that. No siblings, no close family, just me and a failing farm and a future that looked pretty bleak. He stared at his plate. I sold everything, came to Texas with nothing but a horse and a pocket full of money that wouldn't last a month. Figured if I was going to fail, I might as well fail somewhere new. But you didn't fail. No, I got lucky, met the right people, made the right deals, worked harder than I probably should have. He looked up at her. Built this place from nothing, and now I have everything I thought I wanted. But, Lillian said quietly. Samuel paused. No one had ever asked him that before. No one had ever sensed that the success story had a shadow side. But it's empty, he admitted. This house, this life, it's all empty. They sat there in the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows, and for the first time since Lillian had arrived, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something almost like understanding. Why did you really come here? Samuel asked. And don't tell me it was just for work. Lillian was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I needed to disappear. From what? From someone who thought he owned me. Her hands clenched in her lap. Someone who didn't understand that no is a complete sentence. The cold feeling in Samuel's gut returned, sharper this time. Did he hurt you? He tried. She met his eyes, and there was steel beneath the fear. But I left before he could finish the job. Took what little money I'd saved and ran. Ended up here because it's as far as I could get from Pennsylvania and still be in America. And if he finds you, then I run again, or... She stopped. Or what? Or I stop running. But that's not a decision I want to make. Samuel understood what she wasn't saying. That running was preferable to the alternative. That she'd rather spend her life looking over her shoulder than face whatever waited if she stood still. You're safe here, he said. It came out harder than he intended, almost a command. Nobody hurts anyone under my roof. Nobody. Lillian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's kind of you to say, Mr. Hale, but you can't promise that. I can, and I do. He stood up, and something in his posture must have conveyed his seriousness, because Lillian's eyes widened slightly. I don't know what your situation is, Miss Voss. I don't know who you're running from or what they might do if they find you. But I know this. You work for me now. That makes you my responsibility. And I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, she said quietly. No, you're your own. But while you're here, while you're in this house, you're under my protection. And anyone who doesn't respect that will answer to me. For a moment, he thought she might cry. Her eyes got bright. Her chin trembled, but she held it together, nodding once. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just... He struggled for the right words. Just stop being so scared all the time. At least here. At least in this house. I'll try. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Things shifted after that morning. Not dramatically. Lillian didn't suddenly become chatty or carefree. But the sharp edge of her fear dulled slightly. She still worked like a ghost, still kept to herself, but occasionally Samuel would catch glimpses of something else. Her in the garden, dirt on her hands, a small smile on her face as she tended to the vegetables growing in neat rows. Her on the back porch in the evening, a book in her lap, reading in the fading light. Her in the kitchen, humming that same old song, unaware that he stood in the doorway listening. Small moments. But they added up. Dutch noticed the change. You two getting along better? We're getting along the same as before, Samuel said. Uh-huh. That why you've been coming home earlier, taking lunch here instead of out on the range? I have things to do. Sure you do. Dutch's grin was insufferable. Things like making sure your maid is settling in proper. She's not my, Samuel stopped. She's an employee. I'm ensuring she has what she needs to do her job. Whatever helps you sleep at night. But Dutch was wrong. Samuel wasn't sleeping better. If anything, he slept worse. Because now, every night, he found himself lying awake, wondering if Lillian would come to his room again, wondering if she'd kneel beside his bed and pray for his happiness, like he was something worth praying for. She didn't. She'd done it once that first night, and apparently that was enough. But Samuel couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop replaying her words in his head. He deserves to be loved for who he is. Did he? He'd spent 17 years building this empire, stepping on whoever he needed to step on, making hard choices that benefited him at the expense of others. He'd been ruthless when he needed to be, cold when warmth would have cost him. He'd built his success on the bones of his competitors and called it good business. Did a man like that deserve to be loved? 5 weeks after Lillian arrived, Samuel came home to find her crying in the kitchen. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears streaming down her face as she stood at the counter, a letter clutched in her hands. Miss Voss? She spun around, hastily wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, I'm fine. I'll have dinner ready soon. What's wrong? Nothing, just... She looked at the letter. Nothing that matters. Samuel crossed the kitchen in 3 strides. Is it from him? The man you were running from? No. She laughed, but it was broken. No, it's worse. It's from someone I didn't run far enough from. What does that mean? She handed him the letter. Her hands were shaking. The letter was from a woman named Martha, Lillian's older sister, from the brief introduction. But the content made Samuel's blood run cold. Lily, you need to come home. James knows where you are. He hired a detective. Please, you can't keep running. Come back and we'll figure this out together. He says if you come back willingly, he won't press charges about the money you took. Please. I'm scared of what he'll do if you don't. Samuel read it twice. Who's James? The man I was engaged to. Lillian's voice was flat. The man I thought I loved until I realized he didn't want a wife. He wanted property. And the money wasn't his. It was mine, my inheritance from my grandmother. But he convinced me to let him manage it. And when I tried to leave, he claimed I'd stolen it from him. She laughed again, that same broken sound. He twisted everything, made himself the victim, and now he's coming for me. Let him come. You don't understand. James has connections, money. If he says I'm a thief, people will believe him. I could end up in jail, or worse. She stopped, but Samuel heard what she didn't say, or worse, married to him. How long before he gets here? I don't know. Days, maybe? A week? She looked up at him, and the desperation in her eyes was gutting. I need to leave. Tonight, before he arrives. No. Mr. Hale, I told you. You're under my protection. That hasn't changed. You can't fight him. He'll destroy you. He destroys everyone who gets in his way. Samuel smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. Miss Voss, I've spent 17 years building this ranch from nothing. I've fought off rustlers, drought, disease, and every 2-bit competitor who thought they could take what's mine. Your James might have connections back east, but this is Texas. And in Texas, I'm the one with connections. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you prayed for my happiness. The words came out before he could stop them. Lillian froze. What? Too late to take it back now. That night, about a month ago, you came into my room, took off my boots, covered me with a blanket, knelt beside my bed and prayed that I'd find someone who could see me for who I am. He paused. I was awake. Her face went pale. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Samuel moved closer, and this time she didn't flinch away. That was the first time in 17 years anyone gave a damn about me as a person instead of as a bank account. You did that. You, who had every reason to focus on your own problems, took time to worry about mine. So yes, Miss Voss, this is absolutely my fight. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. He gentled his voice. Let me help, please. They stood there in the kitchen, the letter still crumpled in Lillian's hand, the evening light fading outside. And something passed between them. A kind of understanding, a recognition of 2 people who'd both been alone too long. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Samuel nodded. Then we prepare. When your James shows up, he'll find out exactly what happens when you threaten something I care about. The words hung in the air. Something I care about. He hadn't meant to say it quite like that, but watching Lillian's expression shift from fear to something else, something that might have been hope, Samuel realized he'd meant every word. Somewhere in the last 5 weeks, this scared, broken woman who prayed for strangers and sang old songs while she worked had become more than just his maid. She'd become the first real thing in his empty life, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take that away. The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Samuel sent word to Dutch to double the men watching the property. He wrote to the sheriff in town, an old friend who owed him favors. He even contacted his lawyer in Fort Worth, laying out the situation and getting advice on how to handle a man like James legally. But mostly, he watched Lillian. She moved through the house like she always had, but there was a new weight to her steps. The fear was back, sharper than before. She jumped at every unexpected sound, checked the windows obsessively, barely ate. On the third evening, Samuel found her in the kitchen after dinner, standing at the window and staring out into the darkness. "He's not here yet," Samuel said quietly. "But he will be." She didn't turn around. "And when he comes, he won't come alone. He'll bring men, documents, proof that I'm a thief and a liar. He's good at that, making lies sound like truth. Then we'll fight it." "How?" "I don't have proof of anything. The inheritance was transferred to him legally. I signed the papers myself like an idiot. He'll say I stole money that was his by right. And who's going to believe me? Some runaway maid with no family and no connections?" Samuel crossed to her, and this time when he stood close, she didn't pull away. "I'll believe you. That won't be enough." "Maybe not, but it's a start." He paused. "Miss Voss, Lillian, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She finally turned to look at him. In the dim kitchen light, her eyes were silver instead of gray. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." "I know enough. You know I'm trouble. You know I'm being hunted. You know any smart man would send me away before this mess lands on his doorstep." She shook her head. "So why am I still here?" Samuel could have given her a dozen practical reasons. Could have talked about fairness, about protecting employees, about doing the right thing. All of it would have been true. But standing there in the kitchen of his empty house, with this woman who'd seen him when no one else bothered to look, Samuel gave her the only answer that mattered. Because for the first time in 17 years, this house feels like home. And you're the reason why. Lillian's breath caught. "I don't know what's going to happen when your James arrives," Samuel continued. "I don't know if we can beat him legally or if it'll come down to something uglier, but I know I'm not letting him take you, not without one hell of a fight." "Mr. Hale." "Samuel." The correction came automatic. "If we're going to fight this together, you should probably call me Samuel." A small smile touched her lips, the first real one he'd seen from her. "Samuel." "Better." They stood there, and the moment stretched between them like something physical. Samuel became aware of how close they were standing, how he could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, how her hands had stopped shaking for the first time in days. And then the moment shattered. A knock at the front door. Hard, authoritative. The kind of knock that said the person on the other side expected to be let in immediately. Lillian went rigid. "He's here." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Stay in the kitchen." "Samuel, trust me. Remember?" She nodded, though her face had gone pale again. Samuel walked through his house, his empty house that had somehow become a home in the space of 5 weeks, and opened the door. The man standing on his porch looked exactly like Samuel had imagined. Mid-30s, well-dressed in clothes too expensive for Texas heat, with the kind of face that probably charmed everyone it encountered. Handsome in a polished way, with perfectly groomed hair and cold blue eyes. Behind him stood 2 other men. Bigger, rougher. The kind you hired when you wanted muscle instead of conversation. "Can I help you?" Samuel asked. "I certainly hope so." The man's smile was practiced, perfect. "My name is James Garrett. I'm looking for a young woman named Lillian Voss. I have reason to believe she's working here." "And if she is? Then I'd like to speak with her. We have some unfinished business." Samuel leaned against the doorframe, deliberately casual. "What kind of business?" "The kind that involves theft and breach of contract." James's smile never wavered. "Miss Voss absconded with a considerable sum of money that belongs to me. I've been tracking her for weeks, and I'm prepared to involve the law if necessary, but I'd prefer to handle this privately." "I bet you would." The smile cracked slightly. "I'm sorry?" I said I bet you'd prefer to handle this privately. Fewer witnesses that way. Easier to intimidate a woman when there's no one around to see it. James's expression hardened. I don't know what lies she's told you, but she hasn't told me anything. But I'm a pretty good judge of character, Mr. Garrett, and something about you smells rotten. One of the big men behind James shifted forward, but James held up a hand. Mr. Hale. And you are Samuel Hale, correct? The owner of this ranch? That's right. Mr. Hale, I understand you may feel some misplaced loyalty to Miss Voss, but I assure you you're being manipulated. She's very good at playing the victim. It's how she convinced me to trust her with a substantial sum before running off with it. Funny thing about that, Samuel straightened, and his size suddenly seemed relevant. He had 4 inches and 50 pounds on James, and he made sure it showed. I happen to know Miss Voss's inheritance came from her grandmother. Seems odd that you'd call it your money when it was legally hers to begin with. James's face went still. She told you about that? She told me a lot of things, and I believe her. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool with 40,000 acres and enough men with guns to make sure my foolishness stays my own business. Samuel's voice dropped. Here's how this is going to work, Mr. Garrett. You're going to turn around, get back on whatever horse or carriage brought you here, and head back east. And you're going to forget you ever knew anyone named Lillian Voss. Or what? Or I'll make sure everyone in Pennsylvania knows exactly what kind of man you are. I've got friends with newspapers, with businesses, with connections that'll make your life very difficult. Samuel smiled, and it was nothing like James's practiced charm. You might be important back east, Mr. Garrett, but this is my territory. And here, I make the rules. James stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. You have no idea what you're getting into. Probably not, but I'm willing to find out. She's not worth it. Whatever she's told you, whatever fantasy you've built in your head, she's just a woman. Damaged goods at that. Samuel's fist connected with James's jaw before he'd made a conscious decision to swing. The other man staggered back, his perfect face suddenly bleeding, and the two-hired muscle moved forward fast. Dutch and 3 ranch hands materialized from the shadows of the porch. Samuel hadn't heard them arrive, but he'd known they'd be there. Dutch always had his back. The muscle stopped. Smart men. Samuel shook out his hand, knuckles aching but satisfied. That was for calling her damaged. The next hit will be for showing up on my land. Want to push for a third? James touched his bleeding lip, his eyes full of rage. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. You just don't know it yet. Samuel nodded to Dutch. Escort Mr. Garrett and his friends to the property line. Make sure they understand they're not welcome back. Dutch grinned, with pleasure. As the men were led away, James still sputtering threats that meant nothing, Samuel stood on his porch and watched the darkness swallow them. His hand hurt, his heart was racing, and he felt more alive than he had in years. Behind him, soft footsteps. You hit him! Lillian's voice was shaky. Yeah, you didn't have to do that. I know. She was quiet for a moment, then, thank you. Samuel turned. Lillian stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from inside. Tears streaked her face, but she was smiling. He'll come back, she said. Let him. Next time I'll be ready. You can't fight all my battles. Watch me. They stood there in the darkness, and something shifted. Something fundamental. This wasn't employer and employee anymore. This wasn't even protector and protected. This was something else entirely. Something new and terrifying and absolutely right. I should go inside, Lillian whispered, but she didn't move. Neither did Samuel. Yeah, probably. The Texas night wrapped around them, full of stars and possibilities and the quiet understanding that everything had changed, that whatever happened next, whether James came back with lawyers or guns or nothing at all, they'd face it together. Samuel? Lillian's voice was soft. Yeah? That prayer I said, about you finding someone who could see you for who you are? I remember. I think maybe... She paused. I think maybe it got answered. Samuel's heart did something complicated in his chest. Yeah? Yeah. They didn't kiss, didn't embrace, didn't make any dramatic declarations. They just stood there in the dark, 2 people who'd been alone too long, finally finding each other in the last place either expected. And that was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The next morning came too bright and too early. Samuel woke to find his hand still aching from where he'd connected with James Garrett's jaw, a dull throb that felt oddly satisfying. He flexed his fingers, wincing, and allowed himself a small smile before the weight of reality settled back in. James wasn't gone. Not really. Men like that didn't scare easy, and they definitely didn't give up. Last night had been a warning shot, nothing more. Downstairs, the smell of coffee hit him before he reached the kitchen. Strong, black, exactly how he liked it. Lillian stood at the stove, her back to him, and for a moment Samuel just watched her. The morning light caught in her dark hair, turned it almost bronze. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "You didn't sleep," he said. She didn't jump this time. Progress. "Neither did you." "How'd you know?" "I heard you pacing. Around 3 in the morning." She turned, and the circles under her eyes confirmed his guess. "The floorboards upstairs creak." "I'll get them fixed." "Don't!" A ghost of a smile. "It's nice knowing I'm not the only one awake in this house." Samuel sat at the kitchen table, their table now, he supposed. When had that happened? "You want to talk about it? About how I brought a monster to your doorstep?" She set coffee in front of him, her hand steady despite everything. "Not particularly. He's not a monster. He's just a man, and men can be dealt with." "You don't know James like I do." Lillian sank into the chair across from him, cradling her own cup. "He doesn't lose. Ever. When he wants something, he finds a way to get it, and right now he wants me back. Not because he loves me, I don't think he's capable of that, but because I had the audacity to leave, to take what was mine and run. He can't let that stand. It would make him look weak. So this is about pride. This is about control. Always has been." She stared into her coffee like she could read the future in its depths. "I met James at a charity function in Pittsburgh. My sister insisted I go, said I needed to get out more after our grandmother died. He was charming, attentive, everything a lonely girl wanted to hear after losing the only family that mattered." Samuel waited. He'd learned that silence was sometimes the best way to get people talking. He courted me properly. Met Martha, convinced her he was a gentleman. Proposed after 4 months. I said yes because I thought... She laughed, bitter. "I thought someone actually wanted me. Not my money, not my connections, just me." "When did you figure out you were wrong?" "The engagement party. He got drunk, just a little. Enough that the mask slipped. One of his friends made a joke about how I'd be easier to manage than his last fiancée. James laughed. Said he'd learned from his mistakes, knew better than to give a woman too much freedom." Her voice went flat. "That's when I knew. But by then, he'd already convinced me to consolidate my inheritance, put it in an account he managed. For our future." "You tried to leave. Tried being the operative word. He found out. Showed up at Martha's house with flowers and apologies and threats dressed up as concern. Said if I embarrassed him by calling off the wedding, he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of woman I really was. Unstable, hysterical, a gold digger who'd tried to steal from him." "But you left anyway." "I waited. Played the good fiancé for 2 more months while I secretly withdrew money in small amounts. Hid it, made plans. The night before the wedding, I ran." She met his eyes. "I didn't think he'd chase me this far. I thought he'd cut his losses, find some other woman to control. But he hired detectives, tracked me across 4 states, and now he's here." Samuel's jaw tightened. "He touched you? Before you left?" "Once. Grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise when I questioned one of his decisions. Then he apologized so sweetly I almost believed it was an accident." Her smile was sharp. "Almost." The kitchen fell quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Samuel thought about James Garrett's perfect smile, his expensive clothes, the casual cruelty in calling Lillian damaged goods. Men like that existed everywhere, in business, in society, wrapped in respectability while rotting from the inside. "He'll go to the sheriff," Samuel said finally. "Probably today. File a formal complaint about the money." "I know. Sheriff McKenzie's a friend, but he'll have to investigate. Can't ignore a formal complaint, especially from someone with Garrett's resources." "I know that too." "So we need to be ready." Samuel stood, his mind already working through possibilities. "You said you withdrew the money in small amounts. Do you have any proof it was yours to begin with?" "My grandmother's will. It's back in Pennsylvania with Martha." Lillian's expression dimmed. She'd send it if I asked, but James will be watching her. Any mail she sends will get intercepted. What about a lawyer? Someone who handled the estate? Mr. Pemberton, but he's old and James has money. I don't think... Give me his name and address. I'll wire him today. Lillian stared. Why are you doing this? I told you last night. No, really? Why? She stood abruptly, frustration breaking through her careful control. You could send me away. Let James have me and avoid all this mess. It would be easier, smarter. So why are you fighting for someone you barely know? Samuel could have deflected, could have given her practical reasons about justice and doing the right thing, but they'd gone past that point somewhere in the darkness of last night. Because when you knelt beside my bed and prayed for my happiness, you saw something in me worth praying for. Nobody's done that in 17 years. He moved closer, and this time there was no fear in her eyes, just something raw and uncertain. You made me feel human again, Lillian. Not just wealthy, not just successful. Human. And I'll be damned if I let some bastard from Pennsylvania take that away. Her breath caught. For a moment, Samuel thought she might cry. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce, desperate hug. Samuel froze. When was the last time someone had hugged him? He couldn't remember. Slowly, carefully, he returned the embrace and felt her trembling against him. Thank you, she whispered into his chest. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. Doesn't matter. You're the first person who's fought for me instead of against me. That means something. They stood there in the morning light, holding on to each other like drowning people finding solid ground. And Samuel realized with startling clarity that somewhere in the last 5 weeks, this had stopped being about protection or charity or even basic human decency. This was personal. Dutch found them like that 10 minutes later and had the good sense to clear his throat loudly before entering. They broke apart fast, Lillian blushing, Samuel suddenly very interested in his coffee. Sorry to interrupt, Dutch said, not looking sorry at all. But we got company. Sheriff's here. Samuel's expression hardened. That was fast. Garrett's with him. And he brought a lawyer. Of course he did. Samuel glanced at Lillian. Stay in the kitchen. Let me handle this. Samuel, trust me. Remember? She nodded, though her hands clenched into fists. Samuel followed Dutch to the front of the house where Sheriff Tom McKenzie stood on the porch, looking deeply uncomfortable. Tom was 53, with a beer gut and a face weathered by 30 years of keeping peace in a county that didn't always want keeping. He was fair, honest, and one of the few men Samuel genuinely respected, which made this conversation about to be a hell of a lot harder. Tom? Samuel. The sheriff's voice was apologetic. Got a situation here. Behind him, James Garrett stood with a man Samuel didn't recognize, tall, thin, with spectacles and the pinched expression of someone who spent too much time reading law books. His lip was split and swollen from last night, which gave Samuel a mean satisfaction. Mr. Hale, James said coldly, I believe you're harboring a fugitive. I believe you're trespassing. Again. Now hold on, Tom interjected. Nobody's trespassing. I asked Mr. Garrett and his counsel to accompany me on official business. He pulled a paper from his pocket. I got a complaint here alleging that one Lillian Voss, currently employed at this residence, absconded with approximately $3,000 belonging to Mr. Garrett. That true? No. The lawyer, who still hadn't introduced himself, spoke up. His voice was nasally and irritating. Mr. Hale, we have documentation proving that the money in question was legally transferred to Mr. Garrett's accounts prior to Miss Voss's departure. Her subsequent withdrawal in flight constitutes theft under Pennsylvania law. Funny thing about Pennsylvania law, Samuel said. We're in Texas. Theft is theft regardless of jurisdiction. Is it theft if the money was hers to begin with? Tom held up a hand. Everybody just calm down. Samuel, is Miss Voss here? She works for me, yes. Then I need to speak with her. Just ask a few questions, that's all. She doesn't have to answer anything without representation. The lawyer smiled thinly. Is Miss Voss refusing to cooperate with a legal investigation? That seems rather suspicious. What's suspicious is a man traveling 2,000 miles to chase down a woman who clearly wants nothing to do with him. Samuel locked eyes with James. Most men would take the hint. James's face darkened. Most men don't appreciate being robbed by their fiancés. Ex-fiancé. I'm told she returned your ring. She returned a worthless piece of metal. The money she stole could buy 100 rings. Again with the word stole, what? You keep using it like you actually believe it.
Gentlemen, Tom's voice cracked like a whip. This ain't helping. Samuel, I respect you. You know I do. But I got a formal complaint here and I can't ignore it. Either Miss Voss comes out and answers some questions, or I'm going to have to assume she's got something to hide. Samuel weighed his options. He could refuse, force Tom to come back with a warrant, but that would just delay the inevitable and make Lillian look guilty. Better to control the situation now while he still could. Give me a minute. He found Lillian exactly where he'd left her, standing by the kitchen window with her arms wrapped around herself. She looked small again, fragile. All the strength he'd seen in her compressed down into something that could break. He's not arresting you, Samuel said immediately. Just wants to ask questions. What did James tell him? That you stole $3,000, that you're a thief and a liar. And you said? That he's full of shit. Samuel moved closer. Listen to me. You don't have to talk to them. We can wait for a warrant, get you a lawyer. No. Lillian straightened, and something steely entered her expression. No more running. If we're going to fight this, let's fight it head on. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They walked to the front of the house together. Tom's eyebrows rose when he saw them side by side, something calculating entering his gaze. James's expression went cold and hard. Miss Voss, Tom said politely. Thank you for coming out. I just need to ask you a few questions about... I know what this is about, Lillian interrupted. Her voice was steady, stronger than Samuel had heard it. James claims I stole money from him. He's wrong. You admit you took $3,000 from accounts under Mr. Garrett's management? The lawyer asked. I took money that was legally mine from accounts that should never have been in his name to begin with. The transfer paperwork suggests otherwise. The transfer paperwork was signed under duress. James convinced me it was necessary for our future together. The moment I tried to leave, he claimed ownership of everything. James laughed. This is absurd. Sheriff, she's clearly lying to cover her theft. I'm not lying. Lillian's voice shook, but she held her ground. My grandmother left me that inheritance. Not you. Me. You convinced me to consolidate it, to let you manage it, because I was too emotional and too stupid to handle it myself. Your words, James. Not mine. I never said... You said it at the engagement party, and again when I questioned why I couldn't access my own funds, and again when you grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise because I dared to suggest waiting on the wedding. The porch went very quiet. Tom looked between them, his expression unreadable. Mr. Garrett, you want to respond to that? She's hysterical, emotional, making things up to justify her actions. James's voice was smooth, practiced. Sheriff, you must understand. Women in Miss Voss's condition often create elaborate stories to avoid taking responsibility for their choices. My condition? Lillian's voice went sharp. What condition would that be, James? Your mental instability. It's well documented. By who? You? Your friends? She took a step forward, and Samuel saw the lawyer actually step back. I'm not unstable. I'm not hysterical. I'm a woman who finally got smart enough to leave a man who thought he could buy and control her. That's a serious accusation, the lawyer said. It's the truth. Tom scratched his jaw. Miss Voss, you got any proof of what you're claiming? Documentation showing the money was yours? My grandmother's will. It's in Pennsylvania with my sister. Can you get it sent here? James will intercept it. He's been monitoring her mail. That's defamation, the lawyer snapped. Mr. Garrett has done no such thing. Then why did Martha's last letter warn me that he knew where I was? Lillian pulled the crumpled letter from her pocket. She said he hired detectives, that he was tracking me. Does that sound like a man who just wants his money back, or does it sound like something else? Tom took the letter, read it slowly. His expression never changed, but something shifted in his posture. Mr. Garrett, you hired detectives to track Miss Voss? I hired investigators to locate stolen property. Yes. Across 4 states. For 2 months. Tom folded the letter. That's some expensive investigating for $3,000. It's the principle. The principle seems to involve a lot of effort to find one specific woman. Tom's voice was mild, but his eyes were sharp. Some might say obsessive effort. James's smooth facade cracked. Sheriff, are you actually believing this woman's lies over documented evidence?
I'm believing that something here don't smell right, and it ain't coming from Miss Voss. Tom tucked the letter in his pocket. Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking this complaint under advisement. Gonna wire Pennsylvania, talk to some folks, verify some facts. Until then, nobody's getting arrested, and nobody's going anywhere. That's unacceptable. That's how it is. Tom's voice went hard. This is my county, Mr. Garrett, not yours. And I don't take kindly to men who travel 2,000 miles to harass women who clearly want nothing to do with them, documented evidence or not. The lawyer tried one more time. Sheriff Mackenzie, I must insist. Insist all you want. My investigation, my timeline. Tom tipped his hat to Lillian. Miss Voss, you stay available in case I have more questions. Mr. Garrett, you stay in town and away from this property unless accompanied by law enforcement. We clear? Samuel watched James's face cycle through rage, disbelief, and calculation before settling on cold politeness. Crystal clear, Sheriff. Good. Now everybody get off this porch before I decide to charge someone with disturbing the peace. They dispersed, James and his lawyer heading to a waiting carriage, Tom pausing at the bottom of the steps to give Samuel a long, meaningful look. Walk with me, Tom said quietly. Samuel followed him away from the house, out of earshot. When they were alone by the fence line, Tom turned. You sleeping with her? What? No. But you want to be? Samuel's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. It becomes my business when it affects your judgment. Samuel, I've known you 15 years. You're the smartest, most level-headed man I know. But that girl's got you twisted up like I ain't never seen. She's not lying, Tom. Maybe not. But Garrett's got documentation, witnesses, a whole paper trail saying otherwise. You really want to go to war over a woman you've known 5 weeks? Yes, Tom sighed. Then you're a fool. Probably. He's not going to give up. Men like that don't. He'll push, he'll threaten, he'll make your life hell until he gets what he wants. Let him try. And if he wins, if he proves she did steal that money and I got to arrest her? Tom's expression was genuinely sympathetic. What then? Samuel looked back at the house where Lillian stood on the porch, small and alone and brave as hell. Then we find another way. But I'm not giving up on her. Your funeral. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. I'll buy you a week, maybe 2, before I got to make a decision. Use it wisely. I will. And Samuel, get her a lawyer, a real one, not some town solicitor. This gets messy. You're going to need serious representation. After Tom left, Samuel stood there for a long moment, watching the dust settle on the road. A week, maybe 2. Not much time to build a defense against a man with money and connections and the law on his side. But it was something. Dutch materialized beside him like a ghost. That went better than expected. Tom's a good man. Tom's buying you time. Don't waste it. Dutch pulled out a cigarette, lit it. You know what you're doing? Not even a little bit. Good. At least you're honest about it. Dutch exhaled smoke. For what it's worth, I like her. Girl's got spine. Stood up to that bastard even when she was scared shitless. Yeah. You really gonna fight this for her? Yeah, even if it costs you. Samuel thought about his empty house before Lillian arrived. Thought about eating alone, sleeping alone, existing in a silence so complete it felt like death. Thought about her kneeling beside his bed, praying for his happiness like he was worth saving. Even if it costs me everything. Dutch nodded slowly. All right then. What do you need? A lawyer in Fort Worth, the best we can get. Someone who handles estate law and isn't afraid of men like Garrett. I know a guy. Expensive as hell, but he's good. Get him here, whatever it costs. You got it. Dutch started to leave, then paused. Samuel, don't let her go back into that house alone. Not today. She's holding together by threads, and threads break. He was right. When Samuel returned to the porch, Lillian stood exactly where he'd left her, staring at nothing. Her hands trembled despite her best efforts to still them. Come on, Samuel said gently. Let's get you inside. I can't.
Her voice was barely a whisper. If I go inside, if I sit down, I'll fall apart. And I can't afford to fall apart. Why not? Because if I start, I won't stop. Samuel understood that, had felt it himself after his parents died, that if he let himself grieve, really grieve, he'd drown in it. So he'd pushed it down, locked it away, built walls so high nothing could touch him. Those walls had kept him safe. They'd also kept him alone. Lillian, look at me.
She did, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You don't have to hold it together right now. Not here. Not with me. Yes, I do. If I break now, then you break, and then you get back up. That's what people do. I can't. You can. I've seen you do it every day for 5 weeks. You're the strongest person I know. That did it. The tears spilled over, and Lillian crumpled. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, pulled her close, and let her sob into his chest while the Texas sun beat down and the ranch carried on around them. She cried for a long time, cried for her grandmother, for the life she'd lost, for the innocence that let her trust James in the first place. Cried for the fear and the running and the exhaustion of always looking over her shoulder. And Samuel held her through all of it, this woman who'd somehow become essential to his existence in the space of a few short weeks. When the tears finally stopped, Lillian pulled back slightly, embarrassed. I'm sorry, that was human. Samuel brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. That was human. Nothing to apologize for. I got your shirt wet. I'll survive. She laughed, shaky but real. What happens now? Now we fight. Dutch is getting us a lawyer from Fort Worth. We'll get your grandmother's will somehow, build a case, prove the money was yours. And if we can't, then we find another way. You keep saying that like you actually believe it. I do. He meant it. I've spent 17 years building this ranch from nothing. I fought drought, disease, rustlers, and every kind of hardship Texas can throw at a man. Your James Garrett might have money and connections, but he's never faced someone who's got nothing left to lose. You have everything to lose. No, Samuel's voice was firm. I have everything to gain, and I'm not giving up without a fight. They went inside eventually, back to the kitchen where this whole mess had started. Lillian made fresh coffee with shaking hands while Samuel sent a ranch hand to town with messages. One to Dutch's lawyer contact, another to an old friend who owed him favors. The house felt different now. Charged somehow, like the air before a storm. Everything had changed in the space of a day, and Samuel couldn't tell if they were heading toward salvation or disaster. Maybe both. Samuel? Lillian's voice was quiet. Yeah? That prayer I said, about you finding someone who could see you for who you really are. I remember. I meant it, every word. She set coffee in front of him, her eyes serious. You're not just the ranch or the money or the success. You're a good man who deserves to be happy. And I hope... She stopped. What? I hope someday you believe that about yourself. The words hit harder than they should have. Samuel stared into his coffee, throat tight. When had anyone cared about what he believed about himself? When had anyone seen past the exterior to the doubt underneath? I'm starting to, he said quietly, because of you. The kitchen went silent except for the ticking clock. Outside, the ranch carried on, cattle lowing, men shouting, the normal sounds of a working day. But inside this room, time seemed suspended. Lillian moved around the table and did something that shocked them both. She took his hand. Her fingers were small, rough from work, trembling slightly. But they held on to him like he was solid ground in a world that kept shifting. We'll get through this, she said. Together. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. Together. It wasn't a promise they could guarantee. The odds were stacked against them, and James Garrett had every advantage. But sitting there in the kitchen with morning light streaming through the windows and Lillian's hand in his, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Whatever came next, lawyers, investigations, James's next move, they'd face it together. And maybe that was enough. Maybe together they could stand against anything. The next few days passed in tense preparation. Dutch's lawyer arrived from Fort Worth, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen who looked like she ate men like James Garrett for breakfast. She spent 2 days going over every detail of Lillian's story, taking notes, asking questions that made even Samuel uncomfortable. Your sister, Margaret said on the second day. She'd testify? She's scared of James. But would she? Lillian was quiet. Maybe. If she knew I was safe, then we need to get her here. Can't subpoena her from Pennsylvania, but if she's in Texas, James will know the moment she leaves. Let him know. Margaret's smile was sharp. Man can't monitor everything at once. While he's watching her, we do something else. Like what? Like wire that lawyer who handled your grandmother's estate. Get him to send copies of the original will, the transfer documents, everything. Build a paper trail that shows James manipulated you into signing over your inheritance. He'll say I did it willingly. Maybe, but willingly under what circumstances? We establish a pattern of control, of isolation, of escalating behavior. Suddenly, those documents look a lot less voluntary. Margaret leaned forward. Miss Voss, you're not the first woman who's been in this situation. And men like Garrett, they're not as smart as they think they are. They leave trails. You think we can win this? I think we can make it expensive enough that he decides you're not worth the trouble. Margaret's expression softened slightly. But I won't lie to you. This is going to get ugly. He'll drag your name through the mud, make accusations, try to paint you as unstable or worse. You need to be ready for that. Lillian glanced at Samuel, who'd sat quietly through the whole meeting. I'm ready. Good. Then let's get to work. The work was exhausting. Margaret had Lillian write out a detailed timeline of her relationship with James. Every red flag, every moment of control, every time he'd isolated her from friends or family. It was painful to watch, seeing Lillian relive it all, but necessary. Samuel stayed close, offering silent support. He didn't hover, didn't try to insert himself into the legal strategy. But whenever Lillian looked up from her writing, whenever the weight got too heavy, he was there. Dutch noticed, of course. You two getting close? We're working together. Uh-huh. That why you spent 3 hours yesterday just sitting with her while she wrote? Not talking, not working, just sitting. Samuel didn't have a good answer for that. The truth was he'd wanted to be there, needed to be there. The thought of Lillian facing this alone made something in his chest ache. Leave it alone, Dutch. Can't do that. You're my friend, and I'm watching you fall for a woman who's got more baggage than a train station. Dutch's voice gentled. I ain't saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful. Hearts are harder to fix than fences. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man walking off a cliff with his eyes wide open. Maybe Dutch was right. Maybe this was reckless and stupid and doomed from the start. But Samuel had spent 17 years being careful, being smart, protecting himself from anything that might hurt. And where had it gotten him? A big empty house and a life so lonely he'd forgotten what human connection felt like. If this was walking off a cliff, at least he was finally feeling something other than numb. On the 5th day after James's visit, everything changed again. Samuel was in the barn checking on a sick mare when Dutch came running, his face pale. We got a problem. What kind? The law kind. Tom just rode up, says he's got a warrant for Miss Voss's arrest. Samuel's blood went cold. Margaret said we had more time. Garrett went over Tom's head. Filed in federal court, claimed interstate theft. Judge in Fort Worth issued the warrant this morning. Dutch grabbed his arm. Samuel, Tom's out front right now. You got maybe 5 minutes before he comes looking. The world narrowed to a single point of clarity. Samuel strode toward the house, Dutch hurrying to keep up. What are you going to do? What I have to. Tom stood on the porch, warrant in hand, looking miserable. Margaret was there too, arguing furiously, but even Samuel could see it was hopeless. I'm sorry, Tom said when Samuel arrived. I fought this, tried to buy you more time, but a federal warrant. I understand. Samuel's voice was ice. Where's Lillian? Inside. Margaret's with her. Samuel found them in the kitchen, their kitchen, where so much had changed in such a short time. Lillian sat at the table, her face pale but composed. Margaret stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. How long? Samuel asked. Tom says she'll be held in town until the hearing. Could be a week, could be a month, depending on how backed up the court is. Margaret's expression was grim. I'll file for bail, but with Lillian being a flight risk. She's not running. I know that. But the judge won't. Woman who fled across 4 states, they'll keep her locked up tight. Samuel looked at Lillian, really looked, and saw not fear but resignation, like she'd always known this moment was coming. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have kept running, should never have stopped here. Don't! The word came out sharper than he intended. Samuel crossed to her, knelt down so they were eye level. Don't apologize for this. None of it is your fault. James won. No, he got 1 round. That's not the same thing. Samuel took her hands. They were freezing. Listen to me. We're not done. Margaret's going to fight this. I'm going to use every connection I have, and we're going to get you out. You understand? Samuel, do you understand? Tears spilled over, but she nodded. Yes. Good. He stood, turned to Margaret. Whatever this costs, whatever you need, you get it. Call in every favor. Hire every expert. Do whatever it takes. That could bankrupt you. I don't care. Tom appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Samuel, it's time. The ride into town was the longest of Samuel's life. He followed on horseback while Tom drove the wagon with Lillian and Margaret inside. Every mile felt like a betrayal, like he was failing the one person who trusted him to keep her safe. The jail was small, just 3 cells in the back of the sheriff's office. Tom at least had the decency to look ashamed as he showed Lillian inside. I'll make it as comfortable as I can, he said quietly. Extra blankets, decent food, and Margaret can visit whenever she wants. Thank you, Tom. Lillian's voice was steady, stronger than Samuel felt. I know you're just doing your job. The cell door closed with a clang that echoed in Samuel's chest like a death knell. I'll be back tomorrow, Margaret said. We'll prep for the hearing, build our case. I know. Lillian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for trying. When Margaret left to file paperwork, Samuel stayed, stood outside the cell, hands gripping the bars, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. You should go, Lillian said softly. The ranch needs you. The ranch can wait. Samuel, I'm not leaving you here alone. They stood there in silence, separated by iron bars and a justice system that favored men like James Garrett over women like Lillian Voss. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But it was reality. That prayer you said, Samuel said finally, about me finding someone who could see me. You want to know something? What? I've been alone most of my life. Built walls so high nobody could get through. And then you showed up with your quiet strength and your kindness, and somehow you got through anyway. He met her eyes through the bars. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something other than profit margins and property lines. And I'm not giving up on that. On you. Even if I'm convicted? Even then. Lillian's composure finally cracked. She pressed her face against the bars and Samuel reached through to touch her cheek. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Yeah, you do. You just don't know it yet. Tom cleared his throat from the doorway. Samuel, visiting hours are over. It took everything Samuel had to let go, to step back, to walk away from that cell. At the door, he turned back. 1 week, he said. Margaret gets you out in 1 week, or I tear this whole county apart finding another way. Lillian smiled through her tears. I believe you. The night was dark when Samuel finally rode home. The ranch felt emptier than ever, the house cold despite the summer heat. He stood in the kitchen where they'd shared so many quiet mornings and felt the weight of her absence like a physical thing. Dutch found him there an hour later, staring at nothing. She all right? She's in jail. How all right can she be? Fair point. Dutch sat down across from him. Margaret thinks she can win? Margaret thinks she can make it expensive. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. Dutch was quiet for a moment. You love her. It wasn't a question. Samuel didn't answer anyway. You do, Dutch continued, and that's going to make this harder, because if she goes down, you're going down with her. Then I go down. Just like that? Just like that. Dutch shook his head, but there was something like respect in his expression. You're a damn fool, Samuel Hale. Probably. But you're an honest fool, I'll give you that. Dutch stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start fighting back. But sleep didn't come. Samuel lay in his empty bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Lillian alone in that cell. Thinking about James Garrett's smug smile. thinking about a justice system that protected men with money over women with nothing. Somewhere around midnight, he made a decision. If the law wouldn't help Lillian, he'd find another way. He had money, connections, power. It was time to use all of it. And if that meant going to war with James Garrett, so be it. Samuel Hale had spent 17 years building an empire. Now he'd spend everything he had tearing down the man who threatened the only thing that made it worth having. The war started quietly, the way most real wars do. Not with gunfire or grand declarations, but with a telegram sent at 3 a.m. to a banker in Philadelphia who owed Samuel a significant favor. By dawn, Samuel had sent 6 more messages to men scattered across 3 states, each one calling in debts that had been accumulating for years. Dutch found him in the study as the sun came up, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. "You look like hell." "Feel worse." Samuel's eyes were bloodshot, his jaw rough with stubble. "But I got something, maybe." "What kind of something?" "The kind that might make James Garrett regret ever setting foot in Texas." Samuel held up a telegram. "Remember how I said he's got connections back east? Turns out I've got a few of my own, and one of them just confirmed that Garrett's finances aren't as solid as he pretends." Dutch leaned against the doorframe. Meaning he's leveraged to his eyeballs. That fancy lifestyle, those expensive lawyers, it's all built on credit and other people's money. He needs Lillian's inheritance to stay afloat. Samuel's smile was cold. Without it, he's facing some very angry creditors. So this was never about pride. Oh, it's about pride. But it's also about survival. If he can't get that money back, his whole house of cards collapses. Samuel stood, his legs stiff from sitting too long. "Which means we hit him where it hurts. His reputation." "How?" "By making sure every business associate, every creditor, every society matron in Philadelphia knows exactly what kind of man James Garrett really is." Samuel's voice was hard. "By the time I'm done, he won't be able to get credit at a corner store, much less maintain the illusion of wealth." Dutch whistled low. "That's dirty." He put Lillian in a jail cell. "I'm just getting started." The plan took shape over the next 2 days. Margaret worked the legal angle, preparing for Lillian's hearing and filing motions to delay and complicate. Samuel worked everything else. He contacted journalists, businessmen, anyone who might have dirt on James Garrett or be willing to spread rumors that would damage his standing. It wasn't honorable. It wasn't clean. But Samuel had stopped caring about honor the moment he watched Tom close that cell door. He visited Lillian every day. Tom allowed it, though he made his disapproval clear. "You're playing a dangerous game," the sheriff said on the 3rd day. "Am I?" "Word travels, Samuel. I hear things, and what I'm hearing is that you're stirring up trouble in places that don't take kindly to being stirred. Then they shouldn't have given James Garrett the benefit of the doubt." Tom sighed. "I'm trying to help here." "Then let me see her without the commentary." Lillian was holding up better than Samuel expected. She'd always been stronger than she looked, but seeing it tested like this made him realize just how much steel ran through her spine. "You need to stop," she said on the 4th day. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing. Dutch told Margaret. Margaret told me. You're going after James's business connections, his reputation." She gripped the bars between them. "Samuel, if he finds out, let him find out. I want him to know exactly who he's dealing with. He'll come after you. He'll destroy everything you've built." "He can try." Samuel covered her hands with his own. "Lillian, I've got 40,000 acres and 17 years of sweat equity in this ranch. James Garrett's got fancy clothes and debt. I'll take my chances." "This isn't a competition you can win with land and cattle." "No. It's a competition I win by being more ruthless than he is, and trust me, I can be very ruthless when someone threatens what's mine." She flinched. "I'm not yours." "I know." His voice softened. "But you're under my protection, and I keep my word." They stood there in silence, hands clasped through cold iron bars. The jail smelled like old coffee and resignation, and Samuel hated every second Lillian spent in this place. "The hearing's in 3 days, she said quietly. "Margaret thinks she can get bail at least." "She will." "You sound sure." "I am." Because he'd already arranged it. A quiet conversation with Judge Harrison, who owed him for backing his election campaign. Not enough to dismiss the case, but enough to ensure bail was granted. It wasn't clean, wasn't entirely legal, but Samuel had stopped counting the rules he was breaking.
What happens after? Lillian asked. If I get out, if we somehow win this, what then? Then you're free. Free to do what? Go back to being your maid? Pretend none of this happened? Samuel heard the real question underneath. What do you want to happen? Lillian looked away, but not before he saw something raw flash across her face. I don't know. Everything's so tangled up right now. The case, the fear. You standing there looking at me like... She stopped. Like what?
Like I matter. Like I'm more than just a problem you need to solve.
You are more than that. Am I? Because sometimes I wonder if this is just... She struggled for words. If maybe you're only fighting this hard because you see me as something you need to protect, not someone you actually want. The accusation stung because part of it was true. Samuel had always been a protector, a solver of problems. It was easier than being vulnerable, safer than risking real connection. But Lillian was right. She deserved more than just his protection. You want to know the truth? Samuel said quietly. I'm terrified. I've spent 17 years alone because it was easier than risking what it feels like to lose someone who matters. And then you showed up, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I wanted something more than just success. I wanted connection. I wanted... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. What did you want? You. I wanted you. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. Not as a maid, not as a project, just you. The woman who sings while she works and prays for strangers and sees people instead of just their usefulness. Lillian's eyes went bright. Samuel.
You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that this isn't about pride or protection or solving a problem. This is about the fact that I'd rather lose everything I own than watch you get taken by a man who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air. A tear slipped down her cheek. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Probably. And the most wonderful. They stood there separated by bars and circumstances and a legal system stacked against them, and Samuel felt something shift. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about what came after, about the possibility of building something real with someone who actually saw him. Tom cleared his throat from the doorway. Time's up, Samuel. Leaving got harder every day, but Samuel forced himself to walk away, to focus on the battle ahead. 3 more days until the hearing. 3 more days to build their defense and tear down James Garrett's foundation. He worked like a man possessed, contacted everyone he'd ever done business with, called in every favor, spread rumors that had just enough truth to be believable. James Garrett's financial troubles, his history with women, the pattern of control and manipulation that Lillian had experienced but others had suffered too. Margaret watched him work with something like awe. You're ruthless when you want to be. He put her in a cage. I'm just returning the favor. You know this could backfire. If even half of what you're spreading gets traced back to you, then I deal with it. But James Garrett needs to understand that coming after Lillian means coming after me, and I don't lose. On the 6th day, James made his move. Samuel was in town when it happened, meeting with Margaret about the hearing strategy. Dutch came running, his face pale. We got trouble, big trouble. What now? Fire. Out at the ranch, the north barn's burning. Samuel's blood went cold. The north barn housed most of his equipment, his winter feed, everything he needed to keep the ranch running. How bad? Bad enough. I got the men fighting it, but Dutch's expression was grim. Samuel, this wasn't an accident. Someone said it. They rode hard, but by the time they arrived, the barn was already lost. Flames climbed into the afternoon sky, black smoke billowing across the property. His men had managed to save the surrounding buildings, but the barn itself was gone. Samuel stood watching it burn, his jaw tight. James Garrett's message was clear. Back off or lose everything. We got a witness, Dutch said quietly. Young Carlos saw a man running from the barn right before the fire started. Couldn't see his face, but he was wearing city clothes, wrong kind of boots for ranch work. One of Garrett's men. That'd be my guess. Samuel turned to Dutch. Get Tom out here. Get statements. I want this documented. You really think Tom can do anything? Garrett's got lawyers, alibis. I don't care about prosecution. I care about proof. Samuel's voice was ice. James wants to play dirty? Fine.
but he's going to learn that I invented dirty. The hearing came 3 days later, and the courtroom was packed. Half the town showed up, drawn by gossip about the cattle baron fighting for his maid's freedom. James sat in the front row with his expensive lawyer, looking smug. Margaret sat with Lillian at the defense table, both women pale but composed. Samuel sat behind them, and when Lillian glanced back, he nodded once. Whatever happened, they'd face it together. Judge Harrison was 65 and fair-minded, which was the best Samuel could hope for. He listened to both sides present their arguments, the prosecution painting Lillian as a thief and a liar, Margaret countering with evidence of manipulation and coercion. "Your Honor," Margaret said, standing, "the prosecution wants you to believe this is a simple case of theft, but the evidence tells a different story. Miss Voss's grandmother left her that inheritance specifically, with documentation proving it was meant for her and her alone. Mr. Garrett convinced her to consolidate those funds under his management through a campaign of isolation and psychological manipulation." "That's speculation," the prosecutor interrupted. "Is it? We have letters from Miss Voss's sister describing Mr. Garrett's controlling behavior. We have testimony from former household staff about his treatment of Miss Voss. We have medical records showing injuries she sustained while under his care." Margaret's voice was sharp. "This isn't theft. This is a woman reclaiming what was rightfully hers from a man who thought he could control her through fear and manipulation." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the defense is attempting to put Mr. Garrett on trial when he's the victim here. The facts are simple. Money was transferred legally to accounts under his management. Miss Voss withdrew it without permission and fled. That's theft, regardless of the emotional appeals we're hearing. Back and forth it went, arguments piling on arguments. Samuel watched Lillian's hands shake in her lap, watched her fight to hold herself together. He wanted to reach out, to touch her shoulder, to remind her she wasn't alone. But the bars between them now were invisible, made of courtroom protocol and legal propriety. Finally, Judge Harrison held up a hand. "Enough. I've heard both sides, and I'm ready to rule on bail." The courtroom went silent. "Miss Voss, please stand." Lillian stood, her legs trembling but her spine straight. Samuel felt his heart hammering. "I'm inclined to grant bail," Harrison said, and Samuel felt something in his chest release. "However, given the flight risk and the serious nature of the charges, I'm setting it at $5,000. $5,000. A fortune for most people, barely a dent for Samuel. "Cash or bond?" Margaret asked. "Cash. And Miss Voss will surrender her passport, if she has one, and agree not to leave Wheeler County until trial." "Understood, Your Honor." "Bail hearing is concluded. Trial date will be set for—" Harrison checked his calendar. 6 weeks from today. That gives both sides time to prepare their cases properly." The gavel came down, and it was done. Samuel was already moving, pulling cash from the bank draft he'd prepared that morning. Tom accepted it with a disapproving look, but processed the release. 20 minutes later, Lillian walked out of that jail cell for the first time in 6 days. She looked smaller somehow, worn down by the experience. But when her eyes met Samuel's, something sparked there. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper that made his chest tighten. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you home." The ride back to the ranch was silent. Lillian sat beside him in the wagon, staring at the landscape like she was seeing it for the first time. Samuel didn't push for conversation. She'd been through enough. But when they reached the ranch and saw the burned remains of the north barn, Lillian gasped. "What happened?" "James sent a message." Samuel's voice was flat. "Happened while you were inside." "Oh no, Samuel, I'm so sorry." "Don't." He pulled the wagon to a stop. "This isn't your fault. None of it is your fault. But if I hadn't come here, if you hadn't come here, I'd still be living in an empty house, wondering why success felt so hollow." Samuel turned to face her. "That barn can be rebuilt. You can't be replaced." Lillian's composure finally cracked. She leaned into him, and Samuel wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she shook with silent tears. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of being scared all the time." "I know. What if we can't win this? What if 6 weeks from now I'm back in that cell? Then I'll burn down every building James Garrett owns until someone listens." Samuel meant it. "But it won't come to that. We're going to win." "How can you be so sure?"
but because I've never wanted anything as much as I want you to be free. He pulled back enough to look at her. And I don't lose when it matters. They sat there in the wagon, surrounded by the evidence of James's cruelty, and Samuel made a decision. He'd been playing defense, reacting to James's moves, but that ended now. It was time to take the fight to him. That night, after Lillian had gone to bed exhausted, Samuel sat down with Dutch and Margaret to plan. "We need to go on offense," Samuel said. "Everything we've done so far has been reactive. We need to make James defend himself for a change." "What did you have in mind?" Margaret asked. "We find every woman he's hurt, every business partner he's cheated, every person who has a grudge and get them talking. Build a pattern so clear that even a biased judge can't ignore it. That'll take resources, time, money. I've got all three." Samuel pulled out a map of the eastern states. "James has been operating for what, 10 years? 15? Men like that don't change their patterns. If he did this to Lillian, he's done it before." Dutch nodded slowly. "I can send some boys east, quiet-like. Ask around." "Do it." "And Dutch?" Samuel's voice hardened. "If they find what I think they'll find, I want names, dates, evidence, everything we can use to bury him." Over the next 2 weeks, the ranch became a war room. Telegrams arrived daily with information about James Garrett's past, and what they revealed made Samuel's blood boil. 3 previous engagements, all broken off under mysterious circumstances. 2 women who'd filed complaints that mysteriously disappeared. A business partner in Boston who'd lost everything after James somehow acquired his company through legally questionable means. James Garrett wasn't just a manipulator. He was a predator with a pattern going back years. "This is good," Margaret said, reviewing the evidence. "Really good. We can establish that Lillian's experience wasn't isolated, that James has a history of targeting vulnerable women, isolating them, and taking their resources." "Will it be enough?" "It should be, especially combined with the financial record showing his debts. We can paint a picture of a desperate man using whatever means necessary to stay afloat." Samuel looked at the pile of evidence spread across his dining room table. Somewhere in those papers was Lillian's freedom. He just had to find it. Lillian herself had retreated into quiet work around the ranch. She refused to hide, refused to act like a victim. Instead, she threw herself into rebuilding, helping plan the new barn, working in her garden, cooking meals for the men working extra shifts. Samuel watched her with something like awe. Most people would have collapsed under the weight of what she was facing. But Lillian just kept moving forward, one day at a time. "She's remarkable," Margaret said one evening, watching Lillian bring coffee to the men working late. "Yeah." "You love her?" It wasn't a question, but Samuel answered anyway. "Yeah." "Does she know?" "I told her, sort of, in the jail." Samuel rubbed his face. "But I don't know if she believed me, or if she thinks I'm just caught up in playing hero." "Are you?" The question stung because Samuel had asked himself the same thing. Was this love, or was it just his need to protect, to fix, to control outcomes? He'd spent so long building walls that he wasn't sure he knew the difference anymore. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know that when she's not around, everything feels dimmer. And when she smiles, really smiles, not that careful, polite thing she does, it's like the sun coming out. So maybe it's love, or maybe I'm just a lonely old bastard who found someone who made him feel human again. Either way, I'm not letting her go." Margaret smiled. "Then you better make sure we win this case." 3 weeks before trial, James made another move. The town newspaper ran a story about the case, painting Lillian as a scheming woman who'd seduced a wealthy rancher to avoid prosecution. The article was vicious, filled with innuendo and outright lies. Samuel walked into the newspaper office that afternoon and bought the whole damn thing. Paid the owner twice what it was worth and fired the editor who'd written the story. "You can't just," the editor sputtered. "I just did. Get out." It was petty, expensive, and deeply satisfying, but James wasn't done. Letters started arriving at the ranch, anonymous, threatening, warning Samuel that harboring a criminal would cost him everything. His business contacts received similar letters, questioning his judgment and suggesting he was being manipulated. Samuel ignored them all. Let James play his games. Every move he made just proved Margaret's case about his controlling behavior. 2 weeks before trial, Lillian's sister Martha arrived. She came on the afternoon train, a small woman who looked like an older, more worn version of Lillian. Samuel met her at the station with Lillian, watching the sisters embrace with tears streaming down both their faces. "I'm sorry," Martha kept saying. "I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I was scared and I believed his lies, and—" "You're here now," Lillian said. "That's what matters." Martha had brought the original documents, their grandmother's will, the transfer papers, everything Margaret needed to prove Lillian's case. But more than that, she brought testimony about what she'd witnessed during Lillian's engagement. "He isolated her," Martha told Margaret that evening. "Made her stop seeing friends, convinced her that I was jealous of her happiness. By the end, she barely left the house. And when I tried to talk to her about it, he'd always be there, hovering, making sure she said the right things. Would you testify to that?" "Yes. I should have done it months ago. Martha's voice broke. "I was afraid of what he might do. But watching my sister suffer because I was too cowardly to speak up? That's worse than any threat he could make." Samuel liked Martha. She had Lillian's quiet strength buried under layers of fear, and she genuinely seemed to regret not acting sooner. That night, Samuel found Lillian in the garden, staring at the stars. "You okay?" "Martha says James has been asking about her, following her, even after she left Pennsylvania." Lillian's voice was tight. "I put her in danger by asking her to come. She came anyway. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Samuel sat beside her on the garden bench. "The trial's in 2 weeks." "I know." "You scared?" "Terrified." She laughed, but it was hollow. "I keep thinking about what happens if we lose. If I go to prison, or worse, if James wins and I have to go back. That won't happen." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to prevent it." Samuel took her hand. "Lillian, no matter what happens in that courtroom, you're not alone in this. You understand?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Why? Why do you care so much?" "I told you in the jail. I know what you said, but I need to hear it again. Need to know if you meant it or if it was just words to make me feel better." Samuel turned to face her fully. The moonlight turned her hair silver, made her eyes look like storm clouds. She was beautiful and broken and brave, and he'd never wanted anything more than to keep her safe. "I meant every word. You're not a problem to solve or a duty to fulfill. You're the first person in 17 years who made me want to be more than just successful. You made me want to be good." His voice roughened. "And I know the timing's terrible, and I know you've got every reason not to trust men right now. But when this is over, when you're free and safe and can make choices without fear, I want the chance to court you properly, to show you that not every man is like James Garrett." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel!" "You don't have to answer now. Just know that's where I stand. And regardless of what you decide, I'm seeing this through to the end." She kissed him then, sudden and fierce, her hands fisting in his shirt. Samuel froze for a heartbeat before responding, pulling her close, pouring 17 years of loneliness and longing into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lillian rested her forehead against his. "I'm terrified of this," she whispered. "Of you, of what you make me feel, of wanting something good when everything keeps falling apart." "I know. But I want it anyway. Want you anyway." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "When this is over, if we win, I want to see where this goes. No promises, no expectations, just possibility." Samuel felt something in his chest crack open, something that had been locked away so long he'd forgotten it existed. Hope. Real, painful, terrifying hope. Possibility sounds perfect. They sat in the garden until the stars wheeled overhead, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Samuel let himself believe they might actually have a future. The trial was 10 days away when everything fell apart. James's lawyer filed a motion revealing new evidence. Bank records showing Lillian had withdrawn money not just from the joint accounts, but from several of James's personal investments. The amounts were damning, far more than the original $3,000 claimed. "This is fabricated," Margaret said, staring at the documents. "These accounts don't match anything in the original complaint." "Can you prove it?" "Not in 10 days. These are official bank documents, notarized and sealed. Disproving them will take time we don't have."
Samuel looked at the papers spread across the table and felt cold fury settle into his bones. James had been planning this from the beginning, building a case so airtight that even the truth couldn't break through. Then we don't disprove them, Samuel said quietly. We make them irrelevant. How? By making sure James Garrett never makes it to trial.
Margaret's eyes widened. Samuel, you can't. I'm not going to kill him if that's what you're thinking, but I am going to make him an offer he can't refuse. Samuel stood. Get me everything you can on his financial situation. Every debt, every creditor, every person he owes money. I'm going to buy him out. That could cost you everything. Then it cost me everything, but Lillian goes free. He didn't tell her about the plan. Didn't want her to talk him out of it or feel guilty about the cost. Instead, Samuel spent the next week liquidating assets, calling in investments, pulling together every dollar he could access. The ranch could survive. He'd built it from nothing once. He could do it again. But he couldn't rebuild Lillian if she ended up in prison, or worse, back in James Garrett's control. Dutch tried to stop him. You're throwing away 17 years of work. I'm investing in something that matters more. She might not even want you after this. Then I'll have a smaller ranch and a clear conscience. 7 days before trial, Samuel walked into the hotel where James was staying and laid out his offer. Every debt you owe gets paid, every creditor gets satisfied, and you drop all charges against Lillian. Samuel's voice was ice. In return, I don't expose every dirty secret my investigators have uncovered about your business practices, your treatment of women, and the financial house of cards you've been running for the past decade. James stared at him across the hotel room, his perfect facade cracking. You're bluffing. Try me. You'll take the deal because you're drowning, and I'm offering you a life raft. Samuel leaned forward. Your creditors are circling. Without Lillian's money, you're bankrupt within 6 months. But with my offer, you walk away clean. Start over somewhere else. Find some other woman to manipulate. And if I refuse? Then I burn you down so thoroughly that you'll be lucky to get work as a stable hand. Samuel's smile was sharp. Your choice. Freedom and a fresh start, or total destruction. You've got 24 hours to decide. He walked out without waiting for an answer. The next day was the longest of Samuel's life. He worked the ranch, tried to act normal, and waited for James's response. It came at sunset, a telegram delivered by Dutch. Samuel read it twice before believing it. He accepted, he said quietly. That's good, right? Dutch asked. Yeah, that's good. But Samuel's voice was hollow. Because accepting meant James was dropping the charges. Lillian would go free. And Samuel had just spent almost everything he owned to make it happen. He didn't regret it, couldn't regret it. But standing there looking at the telegram that meant Lillian's freedom, Samuel realized that he'd traded his empire for a woman who might not even want him when the dust settled. Worth it, he told himself. She's worth everything. He just hoped he'd still believe that when she found out what he'd done. Samuel didn't tell her. Not that night, not the next morning when she came down to the kitchen with hope lighting her eyes for the first time in weeks. He watched her make coffee, watched her move through the space that had become theirs, and kept his mouth shut about the deal that had just cost him nearly everything. Margaret arrived before breakfast with the official papers. The charges were being dropped. James Garrett was withdrawing his complaint and leaving Texas within 48 hours. It was over. Lillian's hands shook so badly she had to set down her coffee cup. I don't understand. Why would he just give up? Does it matter? Margaret's smile was carefully neutral, and Samuel knew she'd figured out what he'd done. You're free, Lillian. That's what counts. But James never gives up. Lillian turned to Samuel, her eyes searching his face. What did you do? Nothing illegal? That's not what I asked. Samuel met her gaze and saw the exact moment she understood. Her expression shifted from relief to horror to something that looked dangerously close to anger. How much? Her voice was barely a whisper. Lillian, how much did you pay him? She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. How much did my freedom cost you? It doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't, her voice rose. You paid off my debts, my problems. You bought my freedom like I was property changing hands. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Lillian's hands clenched into fists. Tell me exactly what you did, Samuel. All of it. Margaret stood. I should give you two some privacy. Stay, Lillian said sharply. I want a witness to whatever story he's about to tell. So Samuel told her. All of it. The investigation into James's finances, the discovery of his debts, the offer to pay everything in exchange for dropping the charges. He kept his voice steady, factual, like he was reporting on a cattle deal instead of explaining how he had dismantled his own empire to save her. By the time he finished, Lillian's face had gone pale. You spent everything, she said. 17 years of work, and you threw it away for me. I invested it in something that mattered more. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't make this sound noble. You had no right. I had every right to spend my own money however I saw fit. Not when it was for me. Not when I didn't ask for it. Lillian's voice cracked. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've made me into exactly what James always said I was, a woman who takes from men, who ruins them. That's not, isn't it? You paid my way out, bought my freedom. And now what? What do I owe you, Samuel? What's the price of what you just did? The question landed like a physical blow. Samuel felt something cold settle in his gut. You don't owe me anything. Liar. Tears spilled down her cheeks. There's always a price. James taught me that. Men don't do things for free, especially not things that cost them everything. I'm not James. No, you're worse. Because at least with James, I knew what he wanted. I knew the game we were playing, but you... She laughed, bitter and broken. You made me believe you were different, that you wanted me for me, not for what you could get in return. I do want you for you. Then why didn't you let me fight my own battles? Why didn't you trust me to save myself? The question hung in the air between them. Samuel had no good answer because she was right. He'd taken her agency, made decisions about her life without asking, and convinced himself it was love, when maybe it was just another form of control. I was trying to protect you, he said quietly. I didn't need protection. I needed a partner. Someone who stood beside me, not someone who fought my battles while I watched from the sidelines. Lillian wiped her eyes roughly. I spent months running from a man who thought he owned me. And now you've bought me just as surely as James ever did, except your currency was sacrifice instead of manipulation. That's not fair, isn't it? You made a choice about my life without consulting me, just like James did when he convinced me to sign over my inheritance, just like he did when he decided I needed to be managed and controlled and saved for myself. Her voice broke. I can't do this again, Samuel. I can't be with someone who thinks I'm something to be rescued. You're twisting this into something it's not. Am I? Then tell me. Did you ask me before you made this deal? Did you consider what I might want, what I might be willing to sacrifice? Or did you just decide you knew best and act accordingly? Samuel opened his mouth and closed it again. Because she was right. He'd made the decision alone, convinced himself it was the only way, never once considering that maybe Lillian deserved a say in her own fate. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said finally. That's what they all say. Lillian grabbed her shawl from the back of the chair. I need some air. I need to think. Lillian, wait. But she was already gone, the door slamming behind her. Samuel stood in the kitchen that had been their sanctuary, surrounded by the ruins of good intentions and misguided love. Margaret cleared her throat. She's not wrong, you know. I know. You took away her choice, made yourself the hero of her story instead of letting her write her own ending. I was trying to save her. She didn't need saving. She needed support. Margaret gathered her papers. You're a good man, Samuel, but good intentions don't excuse bad actions. If you want her to forgive you, you're going to have to do better than just throwing money at her problems. After Margaret left, Samuel sat alone in the kitchen and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. Not the financial cost, that he could handle, but the look in Lillian's eyes when she'd realized he'd made choices for her, about her, without asking. He'd become exactly what he'd sworn to protect her from. Dutch found him there an hour later, staring at cold coffee. Heard shouting. She's gone. Gone or gone for a walk? I don't know. Samuel rubbed his face. I messed up, Dutch. Really messed up. What'd you do? Samuel explained the deal with James, the cost, Lillian's reaction.
Dutch listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "She's right," Dutch said when Samuel finished. "I know. You treated her like a problem instead of a person. I know that too. So what are you going to do about it?"
Samuel had no answer. He'd spent 17 years solving problems with money and strategy and sheer force of will. But this wasn't something he could buy or bully his way out of. This required something he'd forgotten how to do. He needed to listen, to really listen, not just to Lillian's words, but to what she needed him to understand. He found her in the garden, sitting on the bench where they'd kissed under the stars. She didn't look up when he approached, but she didn't leave either.
"I'm sorry," Samuel said.
For what, specifically?
"For making decisions about your life without asking you. For thinking I knew better than you what you needed. For taking away your agency in the name of protection." Lillian was quiet for a long moment.
"Do you understand why I'm angry?"
"I think so. But I'd like you to tell me anyway."
"I spent 6 months under James's control. 6 months of him deciding what I could wear, who I could see, how I should spend my time. And when I finally got free, when I finally had a chance to make my own choices, you took that away too." She turned to look at him. "I know you meant well. I know you were trying to help. But Samuel, I needed to fight that battle myself. I needed to prove I could survive without someone rescuing me. And I robbed you of that. Yes." A single tear slid down her cheek. "You made me feel helpless all over again, like I was something fragile that needed to be wrapped in cotton and kept safe." Samuel sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I've spent 17 years alone, and when you showed up, when you made me feel human again, I got scared. Scared of losing you, scared of going back to that empty house and that hollow life. So I did what I always do. I tried to control the outcome, to fix things before they could break. But I'm not a fence line or a business deal. I know. You're a person who deserves respect and agency and the right to make your own choices, even if those choices are hard." He looked at her. "I'm sorry, Lillian. Truly sorry. Not for wanting to help you, but for how I went about it. For not trusting you to fight your own battles. What's done is done. James is gone. The charges are dropped." Her voice was hollow. "I'm free. But I don't know what that freedom cost you, and I don't know how to feel about it." "Then let me tell you." Samuel took a breath. "I sold off some investments, liquidated some assets. The ranch is still intact, but smaller. I've got enough to rebuild to keep things running. It'll take time, but I didn't destroy everything." "How much time?" 5 years, maybe. To get back to where I was." Lillian closed her eyes. 5 years of your life to buy 6 weeks of mine. Worth it. "How can you say that? You don't even know if I'm staying." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Samuel hadn't considered that possibility, that she might take her freedom and run, leave Texas and him and everything behind. "Are you leaving?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Martha wants me to come back to Pennsylvania with her, start fresh somewhere James can't find us." Lillian's hands twisted in her lap. "And part of me wants to go somewhere I'm not the woman who brought ruin to a good man's ranch. You didn't bring ruin. I made a choice. A choice I have to live with. A choice that changed everything." She finally looked at him. "Do you understand? Even if I stay, even if we try to make this work, there will always be this debt between us. This thing you did that I can never repay. I don't want repayment. That's not how it works. That's not how people work." Lillian stood abruptly. "I need time, Samuel. Time to figure out who I am without someone else making decisions for me. Time to see if what I feel for you is real or just gratitude dressed up as something else." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe a lot. Maybe forever." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I know that's not fair to you after everything you've sacrificed. But I can't pretend I'm okay with this. I can't pretend your grand gesture didn't terrify me as much as it touched me." Samuel wanted to argue, to convince her to stay, to promise he'd be different. But he'd spent the morning learning that what he wanted didn't matter. This was Lillian's choice to make, and he had to respect it even if it killed him. "Okay," he said, "take whatever time you need." "Just like that?" "Just like that, because you're right. I took away your agency once. I won't do it again." He stood, keeping his distance. "But Lillian, whether you stay or go, whether you forgive me or spend the rest of your life hating me, I don't regret what I did. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Not because I think you needed saving, but because I couldn't stand by and watch you suffer when I had the power to stop it.
That's not love, Samuel. That's control dressed up in prettier words. Maybe. I don't know the difference anymore.
He started walking back toward the house, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. And whatever you decide, wherever you go, I hope you find the peace you deserve. He left her sitting in the garden, surrounded by the plants she'd tended and the life she'd built from nothing. And Samuel realized with painful clarity that maybe loving someone meant letting them go, even when everything in you screamed to hold on tighter. The next few days passed in painful limbo. Lillian stayed, but she might as well have been a ghost for all the interaction they had. She moved through the house like she had in the beginning, quiet, invisible, present, but not there. It hurt worse than Samuel expected. Martha noticed, of course. She found him in the study one evening, staring at account books without seeing them. "She's scared," Martha said without preamble. "I know." "No, I mean really scared. James did a number on her, convinced her that accepting help meant giving up control. And then you—" She paused. "You meant well. I believe that. But you reinforced every fear he planted in her head. I was trying to free her, not control her. The road to hell is paved with good intentions." Martha sat down across from him. "Can I tell you something about my sister?" "Please." "When we were kids, our parents died in a carriage accident. Lillian was 8, I was 12, and everyone wanted to help, wanted to take care of us, make decisions about our future. Our grandmother was the only one who asked what we wanted, who treated us like people instead of problems to be solved." Martha's voice was soft. "That's why Lillian loved her so much, and why the inheritance mattered. It wasn't about the money. It was about grandmother trusting her to make her own choices. And I took that away. You took away her ability to fight for it herself, to prove she was strong enough to survive." Martha met his eyes. "James spent months convincing her she was weak, helpless, incapable of managing her own life. Your actions, however well-intentioned, confirmed that belief." Samuel felt sick. "How do I fix this?" "I don't know if you can. Lillian has to decide for herself what she wants, who she wants to be, and that might not include you." "I know. But," Martha continued, "if you really love her, you'll give her the space to figure it out. No grand gestures, no trying to prove yourself, just patience and respect for whatever choice she makes." It was the hardest thing Samuel had ever done. Harder than building the ranch from nothing, harder than facing down rustlers and drought. Because patience meant sitting with uncertainty, with the very real possibility that he'd lost her before they'd even begun. But he tried. He gave Lillian space while making it clear he was available if she needed him. He didn't push for conversation or forgiveness. He just existed alongside her, letting her set the pace and the terms. A week passed, then 2. The ranch work continued, life carried on, and Samuel learned to live with the ache of loving someone who might not love him back. Then one evening, Lillian knocked on his study door. "Can we talk?" Samuel's heart kicked up. "Of course." She came in, settled into the chair across from his desk. She looked tired but steadier somehow, like she'd been wrestling with something and finally found solid ground. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you did, about why you did it, about what it means." Samuel waited, barely breathing. "And I realize I've been unfair to you. Not about taking away my agency. That was wrong, and I'm still angry about it. But about everything else." She took a breath. "You're not James. You never were. James wanted to control me because it made him feel powerful. You tried to help me because you couldn't stand to see me hurt. Those aren't the same thing. I should have asked you first. Yes, you should have. And if we're going to make this work," she paused, "if we're going to try, I need you to promise you'll never make decisions about my life without consulting me again, even if you think you're protecting me, even if you're sure you know best." "If we're going to try?" Samuel's voice was rough. "Does that mean you're staying?" "I don't know yet. Martha's leaving tomorrow, going back to Pennsylvania. I could go with her, start over somewhere new." Lillian's eyes were gray steel. "Or I could stay here and figure out if what I feel for you is real or just the aftermath of trauma and gratitude." "What do you want to do?" "That's just it. I don't know. For the first time in my adult life, I actually get to choose.
Not because someone's forcing me, not because I'm running scared, just because I want to. She smiled, small but real. And that's terrifying. Take your time, Samuel said, even though the words cost him. I'll be here either way. See, that's the problem. You're being so understanding, so patient. It makes it hard to stay angry at you. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I know. That's what makes it worse. Lillian stood, paced to the window. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to demand something in return for what you did, for the sacrifice you made. But you just keep being decent and respectful and everything James never was. Is that a bad thing? It's confusing, because part of me wants to trust it, trust you. And part of me is convinced it's too good to be true, that eventually you'll want payment for your kindness. Samuel joined her at the window, careful not to crowd her space. I can't prove my intentions to you, can't make you believe I'm different from James. All I can do is show you, day after day, that I respect your choices and your autonomy. How long are you willing to wait? However long it takes. What if it takes forever? What if I never feel safe enough to trust this? Then I'll have spent my life in proximity to someone who made me a better man. That's not a bad way to live. Lillian turned to him, and her eyes were wet. You make it very hard to leave. I'm not trying to make you stay. I'm just being honest about what I want. And what do you want? Samuel thought about lying, about softening the truth to make it easier for her. But Lillian deserved honesty, even when it was hard. I want you to stay. I want to court you properly, to show you what it's like to be with someone who sees you as an equal. I want mornings in the kitchen and evenings in the garden and the chance to build something real together. He paused. But more than any of that, I want you to be happy. And if happy means leaving, if it means starting over somewhere I'm not, then I want that for you too. You're a terrible negotiator, Lillian said, but she was smiling through her tears. Why's that? Because you just told me I could have everything I want with no strings attached. That's not how deals work. This isn't a deal. It's just the truth. They stood there in the study's lamplight, and Samuel saw something shift in Lillian's expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of possibility. I'm not ready, she said quietly. I'm not ready to make promises or commitments. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of fear and survival. I understand, but I'd like to try staying. See what it feels like to be here without the threat of James hanging over everything. See if what we have is real or just two lonely people finding comfort in each other. No expectations, Samuel said. No pressure, just day by day. Day by day, Lillian echoed. I can do day by day. It wasn't the declaration Samuel had hoped for. Wasn't a promise of forever or even a guarantee of tomorrow. But it was something, a chance, a possibility, a door left open instead of slammed shut. He'd take it. The weeks that followed were strange and tentative. Lillian stayed, but on her own terms. She moved out of the small room off the kitchen into one of the guest bedrooms upstairs. She worked the ranch alongside the men, tending the garden and helping with the books. She started teaching some of the younger ranch hands to read in the evenings. And slowly, carefully, she and Samuel rebuilt something that felt like friendship. They talked more than they had before. Real conversations about everything and nothing, his childhood on the failing farm, her memories of her grandmother, dreams they'd had before life got complicated. Samuel learned that Lillian wanted to open a school someday, that she believed education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and dependence. You could do that here, he said one evening as they reviewed the ranch accounts together. We've got the space, the resources, could build a schoolhouse, bring in kids from the surrounding areas. That would cost money you don't have anymore. I'll get it back. And in the meantime, we could start small, use one of the empty rooms, teach whoever wants to learn. Lillian looked at him, something complicated in her expression. You really mean that? Why wouldn't I? Because it's my dream, not yours. Most men would... She stopped. Most men would make it about themselves, Samuel finished, but I'm trying very hard not to be most men. You're doing a decent job so far. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was partnership, respect, the foundation of something that might become love if they gave it time and space to grow. Dutch watched it all with something like approval. You're learning, he said one afternoon. Learning what? How to be with someone without trying to own them. It's a good look on you. Samuel didn't respond, but he thought about Dutch's words as he watched Lillian work with the children who'd started coming for evening lessons. She was patient and kind and firm all at once, drawing out the shy ones and reining in the rowdy. She was good at this, and watching her bloom into her own power was better than any declaration of love. 3 months after James left Texas, Samuel found a letter on his desk. It was from an attorney in Philadelphia confirming that James Garrett had declared bankruptcy and fled to Europe to escape his creditors. The man who'd terrorized Lillian was gone, his power broken, his threats empty. Samuel brought the letter to Lillian that evening. She read it twice, her hands shaking. He's really gone. He's really gone. I thought I'd feel more relieved, but mostly I just feel... She paused. Sad. For the girl I was who believed his lies. For the time I wasted being afraid. That time wasn't wasted. It made you who you are now. And who am I now? Samuel thought about the woman who taught children to read, who ran a ranch's books with precision, who'd survived hell and came out stronger. Someone remarkable. Lillian set the letter aside and looked at him. Really looked, the way she had that first time in the jail when she'd finally let him see past her walls. I think I'm ready, she said quietly. Ready for what? To stop being afraid, to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, to actually try this thing between us instead of just circling it. Samuel's heart kicked up. You sure? No, but I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. She stood, crossed to where he sat, and took his hands. I'm ready to let you court me, Samuel Hale. Properly. Like you promised. With no guarantees about where it leads, but with honest intent to find out. I can do that. And if I need space sometimes, if I get scared and pull back, then I'll give you space and wait for you to come back. Lillian smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her in months. You really are trying very hard not to be most men. Is it working? Ask me in another few months. Samuel stood, still holding her hands. Can I kiss you? You're asking permission? Always. Then yes, you can kiss me. It was different from that desperate kiss in the garden months ago. Softer, slower, full of possibility instead of fear. When they finally broke apart, Lillian rested her forehead against his chest. This is terrifying, she whispered. I know. But good terrifying, the kind that means something real might happen. The best kind. They stood there in the study as the sun set outside, two broken people slowly healing into something whole. It wasn't perfect, wasn't the fairy tale ending people told in stories, but it was real and honest and earned. And for Samuel Hale, who'd spent 17 years living in an empty house with an empty heart, that was more than enough. The ranch recovered slowly over the following year. Samuel rebuilt what he'd sold off, made smart investments, and worked harder than he had in years. But this time, he wasn't working alone. Lillian managed the books, Dutch oversaw the daily operations, and together they turned the ranch into something better than it had been before. Not just profitable, but purposeful. The school grew. What started as evening lessons in the parlor became a proper schoolhouse built on the south side of the property. Lillian taught reading, writing, arithmetic to anyone who wanted to learn. Children mostly, but some adults too. Ranch hands who'd never had the chance. Women from town who wanted more than what they'd been given. Samuel watched her thrive and felt something settle in his chest. This was what he'd been missing all those years. Not just success, but meaning. Not just wealth, but purpose. 6 months after that first tentative kiss, Samuel asked her to marry him. They were in the garden, the one Lillian had planted and nurtured from nothing. The vegetables were thriving, the flowers blooming despite the Texas heat. It felt right asking her here in this space she'd created. I know we said no expectations, Samuel began, and I know you need time to be your own person, to build your own life. But, Lillian's eyes sparkled, but I love you. Not the idea of you, not the comfort of having you here. You, in all your complicated, fierce, independent glory. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love doesn't have to mean loss of self. He took her hand. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Not because you owe me or because it's expected, but because you want to build something together as equals. Lillian was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Samuel's heart started sinking. Then she smiled. You're really asking, not telling, not assuming, not deciding for me? Really asking. And if the answer is no, if you need more time or if marriage isn't something you want, the answer is yes. Samuel's breath caught. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Hale, because you're infuriating and overprotective, and sometimes you still try to solve my problems without asking. But you're also kind and patient, and you've never once made me feel like anything less than your equal. She squeezed his hand. Plus, I love you too. Figured I should probably mention that. They married in the fall, a simple ceremony with Dutch and Martha as witnesses, and half the county in attendance. Lillian wore a dress she'd made herself, simple and beautiful. Samuel wore his best suit and felt like the luckiest man alive. The years that followed weren't always easy. They fought sometimes about money and decisions, and Samuel's tendency to try to fix things before asking if they needed fixing. But they always came back to each other, always remembered that love was a choice they made every day. The ranch prospered, the school grew, and somewhere along the way, the big empty house that had once echoed with loneliness filled with warmth and purpose and the sound of children, their own eventually, 3 of them, each one teaching Samuel something new about love without control. On his 50th birthday, Samuel stood on the porch of his house and looked out over land that belonged to him but no longer defined him. The empire he'd rebuilt was smaller than before, but richer in ways that mattered. Lillian joined him, silver threading through her dark hair now, her hands still rough from work but gentle when they found his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That I used to measure my life in acres and cattle and profit margins. And now I measure it in mornings with you, in students who learn to read, in children who know what it means to be loved without conditions." He pulled her close. "Turns out I was chasing the wrong kind of wealth all along. Took you long enough to figure it out. Had a good teacher." They stood there as the sun set over Wheeler County, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of broken lives and built something neither could have created alone. It wasn't the life Samuel had planned, wasn't the empire he'd imagined building. It was better, because in the end, the loneliest man in Texas had learned that the greatest wealth wasn't land or cattle or success. It was being seen by someone who loved you not despite your flaws, but because of them. It was choosing partnership over control, trust over fear, and building something together that neither could build alone. And that, Samuel Hale discovered, was worth more than all the acres in Texas combined. The years passed the way they do when you're actually living instead of just surviving, fast and slow all at once, full of ordinary moments that somehow added up to extraordinary. Their first child came 2 years after the wedding, a daughter they named Rose after Lillian's grandmother. She had Samuel's dark hair and Lillian's gray eyes, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "You're going to spoil her," Lillian said one night, watching Samuel rock their daughter to sleep for the 3rd time. "Probably. Samuel, she needs to learn to sleep on her own. She will, eventually." He looked down at Rose's small face, peaceful in sleep. "Right now, she just needs to know someone's here." Lillian understood. They'd both spent too much of their lives alone, and neither was particularly good at letting go. It was something they worked on constantly, the balance between holding on and giving space, between protection and freedom. The second child came 18 months later, a son they named Thomas, after Samuel's father. He was loud where Rose was quiet, bold where she was cautious. He kept them running from the moment he could walk. "I don't know how my mother did this alone," Samuel said one exhausting evening when Thomas had escaped the house for the 4th time that day. "She didn't do it alone. She had you." Lillian caught Thomas before he could climb the fence. "And we have each other." That made all the difference. Samuel had watched his mother raise him in isolation after his father died, had seen how the loneliness wore her down. But he and Lillian were partners in this chaos, dividing the load and covering each other's weaknesses. The 3rd child surprised them. Lillian was 42, and they'd thought they were done. But life had other plans. Another daughter, this one small and fierce, who they named Hope, because that's what she represented. Proof that good things could still come unexpectedly. The ranch continued to grow, but differently than before. Samuel rebuilt his wealth slowly, making smarter choices this time. He invested in his people, paying fair wages and treating his workers like partners instead of tools. Word spread, and the best ranch hands in Texas started seeking him out. Dutch stayed on as foreman until his joints got too stiff for daily riding.
Then he moved into one of the ranch houses and became the unofficial grandfather to Samuel and Lillian's children. He taught Rose to track, Thomas to rope, and Hope to swear in 3 languages before Lillian found out and banned him from teaching her anything else unsupervised. "You're a terrible influence," Lillian told him. "Kid's gonna hear worse in town. At least this way she hears it from someone who cares about her." Dutch died when Hope was 7, peacefully in his sleep after a day spent teaching her to play poker. They buried him on the ranch under a cottonwood tree, and Samuel cried for the first time since his mother's death. Dutch had been more than a foreman, more than a friend. He'd been the brother Samuel never had, the one person who'd stood by him through everything. "He loved you," Lillian said that night, holding Samuel while he grieved. "I know. And he was proud of who you became. Told me once that you'd finally figured out what mattered." "What's that?" "People over property, connection over control." She kissed his temple. "He said you were a slow learner, but you got there eventually." Samuel laughed through his tears. "That sounds like Dutch." The school thrived beyond anything Lillian had imagined. What started as evening lessons became a full-time operation with 3 teachers and students from 50 miles around. They taught reading, writing, mathematics, but also practical skills, bookkeeping, contract law, basic medicine, things that helped people build better lives. Some of the students came from families too poor to pay. Lillian taught them anyway, covering costs from her own pocket money until Samuel set up a scholarship fund. He never told her, just quietly arranged for the school to have what it needed. She found out anyway. "You're doing it again," Lillian said one evening, waving the bank statement at him. "Doing what?" "Making decisions about my school without asking me." "It's not your school. It's our school. And I'm not making decisions. I'm just providing resources." "Resources I didn't ask for." Samuel looked at her, at the woman who'd taught him the difference between helping and controlling. "You're right. I should have asked first. Do you want the scholarship fund?" Lillian's anger deflated. "Yes, of course I do. But Samuel, I know. Ask first, act second. I'm still learning." "At least you're trying." She set down the statement. "And for what it's worth, thank you. The fund will help a lot of kids who deserve a chance." It was a small moment, one of thousands they'd have over the years. Samuel still occasionally slipped into old patterns, still sometimes tried to fix things without asking. But he was getting better at catching himself, at pausing to consider whether his actions were helping or controlling. Lillian wasn't perfect either. She still struggled with accepting help, still sometimes saw partnership as a threat to her independence. They'd had fights over it, real fights, not the polite disagreements of people afraid to be honest. Once she'd even packed a bag and stayed with Martha for a week when Samuel had overstepped badly. He'd wanted to chase after her, to fix it immediately. Dutch had stopped him. "Let her go," Dutch had said. "Let her choose to come back on her own terms." "What if she doesn't come back?" "Then you'll have learned an important lesson about respecting boundaries." "But my guess?" "She'll come back. Just needs to remember she can leave and the world doesn't end." Dutch had been right. Lillian came back 6 days later and they'd had the hardest conversation of their marriage, about fear and control and how love without trust was just another kind of cage. "I need to know I can leave," Lillian had said. "Not because I want to, but because I need to know I'm staying by choice, not by obligation or dependence." "I understand." "Do you? Because sometimes I think you're still trying to protect me from a world that might hurt me. But Samuel, the world's going to hurt. That's what it does. And I need you to trust that I can handle it." He'd learned. Slowly, imperfectly, but he'd learned. And their marriage was stronger for it, built on choice and respect instead of need and fear. When Rose turned 16, she announced she wanted to go to college back east. Samuel's first instinct was to say no, to keep her safe on the ranch where he could protect her. But he caught himself, looked at Lillian, and saw her watching him carefully. "What do you think?" he asked Rose instead of deciding for her. "I think I want to study law. Want to help people who can't help themselves like Mama does with the school." "That's a good reason. But I'd need to leave Texas, maybe for years." Samuel felt his chest tighten. His daughter, his first baby, leaving for a world he couldn't control or manage or keep safe. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to find reasons why she should stay. But he looked at Lillian again and remembered what it cost her when people made decisions for her
instead of with her. Then we'll make it happen, Samuel said. Find the best schools, apply, see what's possible. And Rose, I'm proud of you for knowing what you want and going after it. Later that night, Lillian found him on the porch. That was hard for you. Hardest thing I've done in years. But you did it anyway. Let her choose instead of deciding for her. Doesn't mean I like it.
No, but it means you're finally understanding that loving someone doesn't give you the right to control their choices.
Lillian took his hand. That's growth, Samuel. Real growth.
Rose went to college, came home for summers and holidays with stories about her classes and her friends and the life she was building. Thomas followed 2 years later, choosing agriculture school so he could come back and modernize the ranch. Hope stayed home longest, but eventually she too left, to art school in New York, of all places, chasing a dream of painting that Samuel didn't fully understand but supported anyway. The house emptied slowly, and Samuel found himself back where he'd started, living in a big house with too many quiet rooms. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lillian was there, and they filled the silence with conversation and companionship and the comfort of two people who'd built a life together. On their 25th anniversary, Samuel took Lillian back to the garden where he'd proposed. You know what I realized? He said. What's that? When we met, I thought I was rescuing you. Thought I was the strong one, the one with resources and power and the ability to fix things. And now? Now I know you were rescuing me. From loneliness, from emptiness, from a life that looked successful but felt hollow. He touched her face, now lined with age but more beautiful to him than ever. You taught me what actually matters, not land or money or success, just connection, being seen and seeing someone else. Lillian smiled. We rescued each other. That's how it's supposed to work. Is it? I think so. The best partnerships aren't about one person saving the other. They're about two people choosing to face life together, with all its mess and beauty and complications. They stood in the garden as the sun set, and Samuel thought about the young man he'd been when Lillian first arrived. So certain he had everything figured out, so sure that success meant accumulation instead of connection. That man had been rich but empty. This man, older and less wealthy in material terms, was the richest he'd ever been. The letter came on a Tuesday in spring. Samuel was 73, still working the ranch though his body protested more each year. Lillian found him in the study, staring at an official-looking envelope. What is it? Letter from a lawyer in Philadelphia. James Garrett died. Lillian went very still. How? Pneumonia, apparently. Died alone in a boarding house in London. No family, no money, nothing. Samuel set down the letter. The lawyer tracked me down because James left a note. Wanted to make sure we knew. What did the note say? Samuel handed it to her. Lillian read it slowly, her expression unreadable. The note was short, written in a shaky hand that barely resembled the confident script James had used all those years ago. It said simply, I was wrong about everything that mattered. You were the only real thing I ever had, and I destroyed it. I hope you found happiness. You deserved it. Lillian folded the note carefully. I don't know how to feel about this. You don't have to feel anything. He's gone. That chapter's closed. Is it? He shaped so much of my life, Samuel. The fear I carried, the walls I built, the way I struggled to trust you. He's been dead for however long, but he's been gone from my life for 30 years, and I still sometimes feel his shadow. That's not weakness. That's just how trauma works. I know. But I wish, she paused, I wish I could tell that scared girl I was that it gets better, that she'll survive and thrive and build something beautiful from the ashes, that the man who hurt her will end up alone while she'll be surrounded by love. She knows, Samuel said quietly. She's you. And you did survive. You did build something beautiful. Lillian cried that night, not for James, but for the girl she'd been and the years lost to fear. Samuel held her and thought about how the path that led them together had been paved with pain, but had ended in something worth every hard step. When Rose came home that summer with her new husband and their first child, Samuel held his grandson and felt the weight of legacy in his arms. This baby would grow up in a house full of love, would learn from parents who respected each other, would never know what it meant to be raised by someone who saw children as property instead of people. You're crying, Rose said softly. Happy tears. Your mother would say I'm getting sentimental in my old age.
You've earned the right.
Rose watched him with her daughter's eyes in his face. You know what I tell people when they ask about my parents?
What's that?
I tell them you taught me what real strength looks like. Not power or control, but the courage to be vulnerable. To admit when you're wrong. To choose love even when it's hard. That was mostly your mother. It was both of you. You learned from each other, grew together. That's what I want with Michael, that kind of partnership. Samuel looked at his daughter, this brilliant woman who'd become a lawyer fighting for women's rights, and felt pride swell in his chest. She'd learned the lessons he and Lillian had learned the hard way, and she was building a better foundation from the start. That was legacy, not land or money or success, just passing on wisdom earned through hard experience so the next generation didn't have to learn everything through pain. The years continued their inexorable march. Samuel turned 80, then 85. His body slowed, his memory occasionally faltered, but his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Lillian never wavered. She aged beside him, silver-haired and still fierce, still running her school though younger teachers did most of the daily work. They'd built something that would outlast them, not just the school, but a philosophy of education as liberation, of learning as the path to self-determination. On the morning of his 88th birthday, Samuel woke to find Lillian already dressed and sitting by the window. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" "Grateful thoughts." She turned to him. "I was thinking about the day I showed up at this ranch, terrified and alone, with nothing but a bag of clothes and a past I was running from. Best day of my life." "You didn't know that then." "No, but I know it now." Samuel sat up, his joints protesting. "What brought this on?" "Just," Lillian paused, "just thinking about how different my life could have been. If you'd turned me away that day, if you'd been like James, all charm and hidden cruelty, if you'd been less patient with my fear and my walls, or if you'd been less brave, less willing to give a broken old rancher a chance. You weren't broken, just lonely. Same thing sometimes." They sat in comfortable silence, and Samuel thought about all the alternate versions of his life that could have existed. The one where he never met Lillian, died alone in this big house with nothing but money to show for his years. The one where he drove her away with his need to control. The one where fear won and love never had a chance. But this was the life they'd built. Imperfect, complicated, sometimes hard, but real. And that made all the difference. Thomas took over the ranch when Samuel turned 90. It was time. Samuel's body couldn't handle the daily work anymore, and Thomas had earned the right to run things his own way. He did it differently than Samuel, using new techniques and modern equipment. But the core stayed the same, treating people fairly, investing in community, making the ranch a place that mattered beyond just profit. Samuel and Lillian moved into the smaller house on the property, the one Dutch had lived in during his final years. It was enough for them. Cozy, manageable, with a view of the land Samuel had worked for 7 decades. "Any regrets?" Lillian asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "A few. I'd do some things differently if I could go back." "Like what?" "I'd ask you to marry me sooner. I'd worry less about protecting you and trust more in your strength. I'd spend less time in the study and more time in the garden with you and the kids." He took her hand. "But mostly, I'd change the beginning. I'd meet you when we were both young and whole, before life beat us down. Then we wouldn't be us. We'd be different people who maybe never would have understood each other. You think our damage was necessary? I think it made us who we are. You wouldn't have learned patience and humility without losing everything to save me. I wouldn't have learned to trust without you proving yourself day after day." Lillian squeezed his hand. "We're not perfect, Samuel. We never were. But we're real, and that's better than perfect." The winter Samuel turned 93 was harsh. The cold settled into his bones and wouldn't leave. Lillian, 10 years younger and still strong, cared for him with the same quiet competence she'd shown that first day in his kitchen. "You don't have to do this," Samuel said one morning when she brought him breakfast in bed. "Do what?" "Take care of me like this. We could hire someone." "Samuel Hale, after 40 years of marriage, you still think I'm going to let someone else care for you when I'm perfectly capable?" "I just don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden. You're my husband.
My partner. The man who stood by me when I had nothing and asked for nothing in return. She sat on the edge of the bed. Let me do this. Let me care for you the way you cared for me all those years ago. This is different. I chose to help you. You're stuck with this. I'm not stuck. I'm choosing. Every day I'm choosing you. She touched his face. That's what love is, Samuel. Not the easy moments when everything's perfect, but the hard moments when one of us needs help and the other steps up. He died on a Tuesday in March, peacefully in his sleep with Lillian's hand in his. His last words were simple. Thank you for seeing me. The funeral was huge. People came from across Texas to pay respects, former ranch hands, students from the school, business partners, friends. Everyone had a story about Samuel Hale's fairness, his integrity, his unexpected kindness. But the eulogy that mattered came from Lillian. She stood at the front of the church they'd rarely attended, but had supported financially for decades and spoke to a crowd that had come to mourn a legend. Samuel wasn't perfect, she began. He was stubborn and overprotective, and sometimes he thought he knew better than everyone else. He made mistakes, big ones. He could be controlling when he was scared, distant when he was hurt, and too proud to ask for help when he needed it. People shifted uncomfortably, not used to such honesty at a funeral. But he was also the best man I ever knew. Not because he was flawless, but because he was willing to grow, to change, to admit when he was wrong, and do better. Lillian's voice strengthened. When I met Samuel, I was running from a man who thought he owned me. I was broken and scared and sure I'd never be able to trust anyone again. And Samuel, this rich, powerful rancher who could have had anything he wanted, he chose to be patient, to be respectful, to prove through actions, not words, that love doesn't have to mean loss of self. She paused, tears streaming down her face. He taught me that real strength is vulnerability, that real wealth is connection, that the measure of a man isn't what he accumulates, but what he gives away and who he becomes in the process. Lillian looked out at the crowd. Samuel Hale spent the first half of his life building an empire. He spent the second half building a family, a community, a legacy that had nothing to do with land or money and everything to do with how he made people feel, seen, valued, worthy. She finished simply, I loved him. Imperfectly, as he loved me, but truly, and I'm grateful for every day I got to stand beside him. The gravestone they placed was simple, just his name, his dates, and the words Lillian had chosen. He learned to see what mattered. Lillian lived another 12 years after Samuel died. She kept teaching, kept running the school, kept filling her life with purpose. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the lessons Samuel and Lillian had learned the hard way. When her own time came, she was 92 and still fierce. Her last request was to be buried beside Samuel under the oak tree in the garden she'd planted 60 years earlier. They placed a matching stone beside his. Same simple design, same understated words. She taught him to see. The ranch continued under Thomas's stewardship, then his daughter's, then hers. The school became a permanent institution, educating generations of children who might otherwise never have had a chance. And the story of Samuel and Lillian became legend. The cattle baron and the runaway, the lonely man and the broken woman who found each other and built something that lasted. But the real legacy wasn't the ranch or the school or even the family they'd created. It was the lesson embedded in every choice they'd made, every mistake they'd owned, every time they'd chosen growth over comfort. That love isn't about perfection. It's about seeing someone fully, their flaws and fears and failures, and choosing them anyway. It's about being seen in return, about dropping the masks and the walls and the protective distance that keeps you safe but leaves you alone. It's about learning that real strength is knowing when to hold on and when to let go, when to protect and when to trust, when to lead and when to follow. Samuel had learned those lessons slowly, painfully, making every mistake along the way. But he'd learned, and in learning, he'd become someone worth loving, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. That was the story people told for generations, not the rags to riches tale of a man who built an empire from nothing, but the more important story of a man who had everything and discovered it was nothing, who lost half of what he owned and gained everything that mattered. A man who learned that the loneliest mansion is still empty,
But the smallest house filled with love is a palace. That success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. That the greatest wealth in the world is being truly seen by someone who loves you, not despite your flaws, but because of them. Because those flaws are part of what makes you human. The children who learned to read in Lillian's school carried that story with them. The workers who Samuel treated fairly passed it on to their children. The community that the Hales built continued to thrive long after both of them were gone, proof that a life lived with purpose creates ripples that never end. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the wind blew through the Texas plains, you could almost hear it, a woman's voice humming an old song while she worked, a man's quiet laugh in response. Two ghosts who'd found each other in the loneliest places and proved that love, real love, was worth every sacrifice, every mistake, every hard lesson learned. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not the empire or the success or the wealth. Just two imperfect people who chose each other day after day, year after year, who built a life from broken pieces and made it beautiful. That was the legacy of Samuel and Lillian Hale. Not perfection, but persistence. Not a fairy tale, but a true story, messy and complicated and real. The kind of love that doesn't erase your scars, but honors them. That doesn't demand you be whole, but accepts you as you are and helps you become who you want to be. The kind of love that proves the loneliest man in Texas was never meant to stay lonely. He just needed to learn what it meant to be seen, to be known, to be loved not for what he had, but for who he was. And in learning that lesson, Samuel Hale discovered what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not an empire, not success, not wealth or power or respect, just connection, just love, just another human being who saw him truly and chose him anyway. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything.